I have quite literally waited over half of my life for this moment. Dr. Vegapunk, it is an honor to meet you. You're significantly younger and much more breastsome than I suspected you'd be, but this is it. The greatest mind brain in the entire world now stands before us. Every great mystery in this series is but a simple conversation away. But as always, nothing about this is simple. But I was hooked from the very first page because here Eiichiro Oda grabs you by the balls and he says, "Here's a giant mecha shark. It wants to eat you. Good luck." And the page with the shark felt legitimately terrifying. Oda is so damn good at portraying scale and making even the crew of an emperor feel so small and powerless. This one shark panel feels more terrifying than most of the antagonists of the series, and rightfully so. The greatest challenge of One Piece has never been the people that you do all the punch fighting with. It's about the fact that you need to navigate through this apocalyptic world where anything can kill you at any moment. That's the Grand Line, and that is especially the New World. Scenes like this make me very nostalgic, as did the chapter in general for many reasons. But this reminds me of the days when we first set sail and had absolutely no idea what kind of challenges we were about to encounter. And while it did feel like classic One Piece, at all times my eyes were wide open because of all of the Vegapunk hints. I did not expect anything to do with Vegapunk during this arc. But as soon as I saw the Unk written on the shark, my jaw dropped. I then had to pick it back up, but it immediately dropped again when I saw the robot and it said Vega Force 1. And after that, I just made a conscious decision to leave my jaw on the ground in anticipation. I have to say, for a very brief moment, I thought this thing was actually Franky Shogun, as if Franky was about to have a hero moment engaging in some sort of mecha versus mecha combat. I mean, it's very similar because it follows Oda's design philosophy of cool robots. Basically stacked like a titanium Jenga tower on top and itty bitty chicken legs on the bottom. But I'm hoping that this misconception is a sign of things to come. Surely, Franky is being set up to be a major focal point of this arc, which I know is a dangerous thing to say because if Franky in the New World were a Charles Dickens novel, then it would be Great Expectations. Brackets, but never met. This is a now or never moment for Franky. He's on the most technologically advanced island in existence and has come face to face with his non-consensual mentor. Franky spent 2 years studying Vegapunk's work. So with the exception of characters like Caesar, Queen, and Judge, he probably knows more about Vegapunk than I guess anyone else on the planet. And I imagine that's definitely why Oda gave Franky that dialogue at the end of the chapter. The whole "thank you for saving us" thing. It's a small nuance, but Oda generally doesn't have Franky deliver dialogue like that. He's not the chosen first contact representative of the crew. He mostly just poses in the background and injects with the occasional ow ow ow. So with all of that in mind, I think that we should all sit down with a cola or two and prepare for a Franky feature. With that said, Jinbei was the undisputed star of the chapter for me. During the whole shark fiasco, Jinbei immediately and appropriately proved his worth as a crew member. Not just by saving them, but in this dire moment effectively taking on the role of the captain when no one else was able to. He issued Franky an order, he came up with a game plan, but he did not anticipate shark missiles. Rookie error. But to say that Jinbei is well-rounded is both figuratively and literally true. Situations like this actually make me wonder how did we survive so long without him? Water is dangerous. But a new arc has officially begun. Not because we're at a new island and not because of the onslaught of new characters, but it's because the crew have been split up again. It is impossible to have a New World arc where the crew explore together, although I wish that Oda would have come up with a slightly better way to do it. Because I can't help but feel like I've seen the situation before. And that's because we have. Wano began in more or less the exact same way. The ship sailed into some unfriendly conditions, the crew did a bit of a drown, and we woke up split up. What I do like is that the final perspective of this drowning section is through Usopp, which is a great choice because it really amps up the feeling of powerlessness and helplessness and all of the otherlessnesses by focusing on the weakest crew member being engulfed in forces far beyond his control. Meanwhile, we also spend some time on a nearby marine base, which gave me all of the nostalgia for Punk Hazard. So many similarities. We're on a winter island with a member of the worst generation with the giant kids, and Tashigi is also there. It's like we've stepped back in time, but all of these threads are finally coming together. We have Franky, who spent 2 years on Vegapunk's home island. We also have the Punk Hazard gang, and even Caesar Clown is on the cover, evoking all of the Punk Hazard-y feelings of that lab. And at the end of Dressrosa, Tashigi even told the children that they were going to see Vegapunk, so we're now getting to that, and finally bringing all of this this stuff together. All of this stuff that we've spent a whole generation setting up is finally paying off. As a side note, it took me like an embarrassingly long amount of time back in the day to make the connection between Vegapunk and Punk Hazard. So that has made me quite hypersensitive to seeing the word punk or even its component letters. That's why when the shark appeared, I was like, aha, I see it this time. And it was nice to see the Punk Hazard kids again, and there is some commentary about their recovery. Apparently, they're a lot smaller now, although, to be honest, if that hadn't literally been said, I'm not sure I would have noticed. Mokka in particular is still pretty damn huge. And I think the problem is that the giant kidlets were drawn at very inconsistent sizes during Punk Hazard, not just in relation to each other, but also in relation to themselves. Like, there were some times I remember where Mokka would tower over Frankie, but then there were other times where she wasn't much taller than human form Chopper. So as a result, I don't really have an internal scale for them, but I'm glad that they're allegedly returning to normal. And here we are also introduced to a gaggle of new and potentially relevant Marines that, to the best of my knowledge, have not appeared anywhere else in the series to this point. However, I could be wrong about that. I have a notoriously bad memory for like background Marines, and they do seem like the kind of characters who might have shown up in the background of a cover story or something, but I'm like 80% that we've not seen any of them before. Hello everyone, it is Liam from the future here, and I just wanted to make this quick video because I was right about my terrible memory, and as it turns out, Prince and the Prince pals were actually part of Capone's cover story. But I guess any character who isn't Zoro just sort of fades from my mind. Anyway, back to whatever it is I was talking about. Hibari immediately sticks out to me because if this manga was about Kobe, then she seems like the obvious lead female love interest. Although I think my view of that may be poisoned because she looks quite a bit like Noelle from Black Clover. But I feel like I can see a situation where Helmeppo and Hibari go rogue and head to Egghead Island to try and get a hold of a Seraphim. And that is like a whole different layer of its own. I didn't even think about this whilst reading the chapter, but in theory, this island could be housing all of the Seraphim, which immediately makes this location less of a light and fun, eggy adventure and more of an absurdly dangerous one for our pirate dudes. However, the highest ranking new Marine we're introduced to is the commander of G14, Vice Admiral Dole, who from design alone, I imagine would get along very well with King, you know, because of all of the BDSM. But probably the new Marine who interests me most is Rear Admiral Prince. His design is quite striking because it's kind of like a budget Doflamingo vibe, as if the Marines were given a half-an-hour challenge in an op shop to come up with the best Warlord cosplay they could. But I quite like his hat, because it's long. And it's long for like no good reason. The tip it's just stupidly long, and I like it. That is all. I also think it's interesting that he was pointed out as a member of SWORD, whereas Vice Admiral Dole did not have that designation, so she's not in on all of the SWORD-based goodness. It adds a certain element of intrigue, these hidden agents having to act cautiously within their own ranks. One question though, where is Smoker? It's very odd to see Toshigi without her perpetually grumpy chaperone, and the last time we saw him was at the end of Dressrosa, and he was on the ship with Toshigi and the kids on their way to what we now know is Egghead Island. In terms of the in-world timeline, that probably would have been close to, I don't know, like about a month ago. So Smoker may have had to leave to do other marine-y business, I suppose. But Big Eater and now Big News Jewelry Bonnie got a lot of time to shine here, specifically glistening topless on the shores of Egghead. And I'm not a massive fan service person. I mean, I feel like I'm kind of neutral on it, unless it feels really forced and immersion breaking. For example, I would probably classify every single Nami bath or shower scene in that kind of category. To be fair though, Bonnie is the kind of character who would just do this. She does not give any craps, which I find much more natural than Oda just finding weird ways to remove Nami or Robin's clothing. It was a really fun interaction though. I love that Bonnie was all like, how dare you not know me? I am the Jewelry Bonnie and I am also one of the worst. Which I feel is almost directed at the readers because she is probably the most forgotten about Worst Generation member. Hence why I suppose Oda was making a big impression here with the nakedness. And Luffy instantly gave her a nickname which, according to the Luffy name theory, means that Bonnie has no chance of joining the crew. Regardless though, this chapter is going to start a whole new series of Straw Hat campaigns. Because I've also been seeing a lot of Vegapunk for Nakama talk, because that's what happens every time a new pretty lady thing is introduced. Speaking of though, our dear Bonnie has business with our maybe dear Vegapunk, and I feel like that's obviously to do with Bartholomew Kuma. Bonnie went all the way up to Marijois, probably discovered that there was no saving Kuma, and now she's had to come all the way back down to confront the person who did this to him in the first place. It could be deeper than that, could also be be a lot more shallow than that, but that's likely our general direction. I do like this quartet we formed though. Jinbei especially, as the newest crew member, needs as much time as he can get involved in a classic Straw Hat adventure romp, whereas if he were left with the larger clump of the crew, he likely wouldn't be able to have anywhere near as much focus. But the thing I'm looking forward to most is the dynamic between Bonnie and Luffy, because as soon as we hit a moment where food is involved, that is the potential for chaos. Now that Big Mom has taken up a career as a magma swimmer, Bonnie is probably the only person in this world who can rival Luffy's sheer propensity for gluttony. I mean that, and I suppose Warpole. But apart from food, these two don't seem like natural enemies. Bonnie's goals don't necessarily clash with Luffy's, so we probably have another Tsundere alliance incoming. But now for the wildest part of the chapter. At the very end, we get introduced to the elusive Dr. Vegapunk. The biggest possible subversion, thinking that we were in for some sort of old man, but what we got was a young girl. First thing though, this is definitely not the original and potentially not even the real Vegapunk. I mean, look, there's a bunch of people on the internet trying to sound smart right now going, yeah, like I always knew that Vegapunk was going to be a young woman because I am the best. Despite the fact that in the series he has been repeatedly referred to and shown as an old man. To me, it seems like we have a more advanced Frankie situation happening. The 02 label may indicate that Vegapunk has moved his consciousness into a new body, probably to combat the whole getting old thing. Plus, the silhouette we saw of Vegapunk on Punk Hazard had that literal egghead thing going. So either this is a new Vegapunk body or he is controlling this thing from afar. My initial reaction to the design was honestly that it looks a lot like Uta. And that's probably just because the last few months have bombarded me with film red promotional material, so much so that I am utterly sick of seeing Uta. But as a result, she's still very fresh in my mind brain. However, there are a lot of similarities with the whole slender cute girl wearing bulky jacket and having like technologically advanced earphones and things. There's also some Reiju vibes as well with the earphones and the hair covering one eye. In essence though, it is a very standard Oda design. I definitely don't think it's the most exciting thing in the world, and if Vegapunk's name wasn't attached to it, then it would probably be very forgettable. However, what gives this section a lot of promise is that this smiling girl is in fact a declared enemy. We're on an island run by a brilliant mad scientist who works for the people who are not us. Although I do wonder how long that will last. Vegapunk's morality has been quite a puzzle over the course of One Piece. On the one hand, yes, he does build super weapons for the evil government, but on the other, he does genuinely kind things like helping out Kuma or even the inhabitants of his home island. And I'm incredibly curious to know what the reaction will be when he discovers that these are the Straw Hat Pirates, or even if that matters at all. I mean, the only reason why it might is because he did program Kuma to defend their ship, but the future holds endless possibilities. For example, are we going to see the return of Sentomaru, who was and presumably still is Vegapunk's chonk bodyguard? We've been waiting an awfully long time for him to be in some way relevant again, and having him on the island would seriously add to the danger alongside the Seraphim. At the moment, I feel like Vegapunk won't turn out to be a grand enemy though. And a lot of that is because of Oda's words in SBS Volume 48, when he was talking about devil fruits and he said, "For more detail, you'll just have to wait for a certain professor to make his appearance in the story and explain exactly what devil fruits really are, eventually." For some perspective, that was published in 2007, so that eventually turned out to be 15 years. Also, this was the SBS in which Oda revealed Chopper's form after eating 4 Rumble Balls, which is a glorious sight in and of its own. But that is why Vegapunk is so damn exciting. Any week now, we could be discovering the full truth behind how devil fruits work and where they originally came from. One of the corest of mysteries in the entire series is going to be solved during this very arc. Sun God versus Catman. This is the rematch that some of you may or may not have been waiting for. Rob Lucci to this very day remains one of Luffy's toughest enemies, who pushed him to the brink like no other, except for these 2 others. And he's back. This chapter was insane, so we're going to do that thing we do and talk about it. So we pick up immediately where we left off with the Straw Hats being confronted by Vegapunk, or should I say a Vegapunk? Or not even, I guess we're just going to call her Lilith, because otherwise this Vegapunk business is going to get confusing. As suspected, Lilith is not the original Vegapunk. Well, she sort of is, I mean, kind of. From what I gather, Lilith is one aspect of Vegapunk, specifically the evil aspect, which is made very clear with the name. Lilith is like mythology's OG she-demon, the first wife of Adam who left him after a very awkward breakup. We'll get more into the punks in a bit, but easily my favorite part of this chapter opening was everything to do with Zoro. I love seeing him in situations like this because he immediately assumes leadership. He's like, Luffy's not here, someone needs to take care of these idiots. So you know what, I'm gonna cut some things. potentially a lot of things. This right here is the key difference between number 2 and number 4. While Sanji is busy dealing with the sous chef in his pants, Zoro is keeping his cool, no doubt aided by his decision to take off his shirt in the snow. That's the power of a cold shower, I suppose. But in all seriousness, I think that Frankie and Sanji are only doing this because they feel perfectly safe at this moment. They know that everything is under control, and of course they do. Zoro's there. Usopp, Nami, and Brook, yeah, they're freaking out, but that's just sort of what they do. I also need to mention Robin because holy crap, I love that she was given this hyper-serious focus next to Zoro. It really portrays her as one of the heavy hitters of the crew, someone not to be underestimated, and also someone who can be considered even more of a demon than our Lilith here. Also, how amazing is Frankie? I don't think I've ever seen him happier than he is in this chapter. You know, he usually has this really cool super smile, like he's too cool for you and me. But in this case, he has gone 100% fanboy and is in cyborg heaven. As suspected, Frankie does idolize Vegapunk, and just as a reminder, for the whole of the Egghead Island arc, we will be playing Frankie Bingo. And if we can hit a full row, column, or diagonal, then Grand Line Review will be donating $1,000 dues to a charity voted on by you guys. And if we don't hit a bingo, then we fail and must donate twice as much. But that's what all the coal is all about as well. And we didn't hit anything in this chapter, but look, there is still plenty of time for some Frankie-based action. During this section, we are introduced to our second Vegapunk, the punk of logic named Shaka, which a brief and unrefined Googling tells me is likely based on Buddha, as Siddhartha was the leader of the Shaka clan pre-enlightenment, and Shaka is a name particularly used in the Japanese mythology of Buddha. I also see it spelled as Shakya, but essentially this Vegapunk is a clear thinker. Although there is also the Vegapunk of wisdom, so I'm keen to see what the difference is between logic and wisdom as characters. I imagine that logic is completely devoid of emotion, and I suspect the Vegapunk that can build these super weapons because it's just putting simple puzzle pieces together, whereas wisdom is the part that goes, hey, maybe we shouldn't use the weapons we built. Towards the end of this section, Zoro also has an endlessly intriguing line, indicating that he, of all of the people, may have some business with Vegapunk. This would make sense with Frankie, yes. Robin, also yes. Nami, absolutely yes. They're controlling weather on this island. She would love to see that. But Zoro, what reason could he possibly have to take an interest in Vegapunk? In any case, we have officially embarked on a new arc because this chapter has the standard adventure title, which I love because those chapters are usually accompanied by this introductory massive landscape shot, which in this case included the letters SSG hidden in the background there, but also an introduction to whatever crazy gimmicks the island involves. And this did not disappoint at all. Watching Luffy, Bonnie, and Chopper discover all of the wacky aspects of Egghead Island was great, and I especially enjoyed Jinbei's role because he feels a lot like a parent at a theme park watching his kids go wild. He is the father of the crew after all. And there's so much to cover here, but a solid highlight for me was watching Luffy almost activate Gear 5th due to a holographic parfait. Because I like that Gear 5th is being treated as exactly what it is. The extension of a child's imagination, which is going to come out in all sorts of moments, not just the dire life or death ones. This is the second time it's happened now, and I think that it's more than just a fun gag. I think that this is Oda showing us that Luffy has changed. He's become more free, he's awakened. And now the true power of this fruit is available for casual use. Here we are also introduced to our third Vegapunk, being the very deceptive Atlas, our punk of wrath, who was following the trend of Lilith in terms of very strongly evoking Uta from Film Red. It's very hard to see that split hair effect in One Piece and think of anything else right now. As for the name, I think Atlas is an obvious one, the Titan condemned to carry the heavens for all eternity and so on. Which is probably why our Atlas is so massive, although I like the subversion that instead of some big strong man thing, our Atlas is a little girl. Actually a girl who is both somehow little and big at the same time. But it's through Atlas that we get introduced to this idea of holograms, and a shockingly deep discussion regarding perceptions of reality and what is in fact real. Now when I first started reading this chapter, I was not anticipating to have my view of reality challenged by a very angry little big girl, but here we are. And I think it's very easy to skip over this section, but this is laying some very important foundation. You don't introduce the idea of holograms and specifically being able to touch the holograms without it being a future plot point. I think that principle is known as Chekhov's gloves that literally let you touch light for some reason. I don't know what that plot point will be because the options are frankly endless at this stage, but after seeing this, I would be very surprised if Luffy didn't get a hold of those gloves at some point and try to punch fight some holograms. But then again, what would be the point of that? Because they can't actually do anything to him. They let you touch the holograms. They don't let the holograms do it the other way around. So maybe we're working towards a disaster style situation where the properties of the glove are somehow washed all over the island and we end up with a Jurassic Park scenario. I don't know. What I do know is that Oda was very sneaky in this chapter, and if he thought I wouldn't notice this, he was very wrong. Luffy and Bonnie stumble upon a delicious machine that produces 500 unique foods. And where have I seen this exact thing before? This is my actually moment, because because that is clearly just a Cardassian replicator. I have watched far too much Deep Space Nine to not instantly recognize that. But for all of the non-Star Trek weirdos like me, the more interesting part is the dish it created. Because what spawned, seemingly at random, was Frankie's favorite food being burgers and fries, also accompanied by a Vega Cola. Now I need, and I mean need, to see what Frankie looks like when he is powered by Vega Cola. As stupid as it is, this might be the Frankie upgrade that I say we, I mean me. This may be the Frankie upgrade that me have been waiting for. And then there's Bonnie. She delivered us with two very important revelations this chapter. One confirming that she is indeed the daughter of Bartholomew Kuma, which perhaps sadly puts an end to many of the best Bonnie conspiracy theories. My personal favorite was that she was hundreds of years old and actually the ancestor of Big Mom. But now there is no Big Mom, just small daughter. This also cements her position in One Piece as our newest princess, thanks to Kuma having been a king. So we can probably expect to see Bonnie go in a similar direction to the Vivi's, Rebecca's, Puddings, and Hioris of the world. Basically, she's gonna need help, and we're gonna do the helping. So I'm starting to wonder if the Sorbet Kingdom actually may be a big arc on the horizon, or if we're gonna take care of this Bonnie business rather quickly. It's interesting because princesses usually signify a long-term commitment to storytelling in this series, because there is no such thing as a quickie princess. They have connections to kingdoms, and those kingdoms have problems, and it all just takes a long time to sort out. The quickest way I could see this being resolved is that Vegapunk is like a hologram Kuma with a message for Bonnie, or perhaps Kuma's actual consciousness has been placed in another body, and then everyone lives happily ever after 15 to 20 chapters later. Probably not though. I would suspect that we're in with Bonnie for the long haul, especially because out of nowhere she drops that, oh, I ran into Sabo, you know, the guy who's your brother, which I both love and hate, because now we know that Bonnie has crazy information for us, but it's also like Oda making an announcement of an announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, I am here to announce that I have a Sabo announcement at not now. Later. But that's potentially why Bonnie is so quick to, I mean, I don't know if trust is the right word. I guess it kind of is. But I don't know if that's why she's so quick to trust Luffy. Because she met Sabo and she knows that Luffy is a good boy. Alright, more big stuff now though, because there's a running theme in this chapter of running out of research funds, which is usually not something I would focus too much on. Like if it was just an offhand comment from Lilith, then who cares? But then it was touched upon again by Atlas. And it's an interesting problem to have because it has what could be a very convenient future solution. I mean, firstly, the whole talk of research funds just reminds me of how Caesar Clown blew all of Big Mom's gigantification funds on women and booze. And in all of that time, I guess the only thing he could figure out how to make bigger was his clown car. But this all has the makings of a happy ending. The Vegapunks, plural, have come close to more or less solving every societal issue like climate and world hunger. All they lack is the money and the skilled craftsmen to mass produce. Now I know who happens to have quite a bit of the monies, and it's these bunglenuts, who are quite conveniently very much our ultimate enemy guys. And you know what they say? The enemy of my enemy is, in this case, a scientist who has split himself into 6 other people. Because the world government has continued to make the most questionable at best decisions possible with the arrival of CP0 to eliminate the Vegapunks. And this, I thought it couldn't get any worse, but this is the worst idea they have ever had. Even Lucci was like, oh, so our mission is to kill the most useful person possible? Cool. At this point, I'm seriously wondering if Eam and the 5 Elder Stars are actually supporting Luffy from the shadows, because they keep pushing phenomenal allies right into his outstretched rubbery arms. After this chapter, there is no doubt in my mind that Vegapunk, or at least part of Vegapunk, is going to become an ally. Or maybe there will even be some Punk v Punk conflict, with half of them siding with the world government. You know, evil, logic, and wrath go to their side. Or actually, no, that can't happen, because again, the world government are trying to kill all of them. At this point, I feel like CP0 should be considering their own futures as well, because the world government is gradually kill murdering all of their greatest assets, which may mean that their well-dressed heads could be next on the chopping block. For now though, I could not be more excited to see Lucci and Kaku again. Those two villains in particular are very special for me, because I caught up on One Piece while Enies Lobby was being published, so they were like my first current villains that I was following week to week. And the question does need to be asked. Are we going to see an Enies Lobby rematch? And if so, just how much is Lucci going to get absolutely obliterated? I get that they've become more powerful now, I accept that, but it is so hard to see a situation where any of those agents are able to stand against the current Luffy, Zoro, or even Sanji. Like, they're not rookies anymore. This is an emperor and his commanders. If all goes as is currently set up, I'm also looking forward to seeing Robin's reaction to the former CP9 agents, because this could be a great moment of growth for her. Considering that the last time we saw them, Robin was terrified of them. They were unbeatable enemies. No one stood a chance. So I'd love to see Robin confront them a bit more casually, knowing that she's perfectly safe. However, the appearance of CP0 almost certainly solidifies a role for Sword in this arc, right? They are the warring factions after all, Sword versus Shield. So it would be great to see that dynamic continue continue to play out, especially with characters like Helmeppo, who really has no business taking on Lucci, Kaku, or Stussy. I don't want to get too excited though, because we could always have a bit of a Zoe situation happen, by which I mean there was a period where it looked like Jack was going to return and there would be a big old fight battle, but then he was abruptly halted and the arc ended. The same thing could happen here, but there is one thing that gives me hope for a different future, and that would be the Kuma Seraph. I don't think it's a coincidence that CP0 are arriving with that particular one, and narratively it may be designed to confront Bonnie in some way. Also, the Kuma Seraph looks massive compared to Hancock and Mihawk, but I think that's because Kuma, unfortunately for his mother, is just a big dude. And I think that what we're seeing here is just how crazy huge Kuma was even as a child. But speaking of crazy, probably the craziest detail of the chapter was found on the very first page, because it looks like a certain someone is finally making his long-awaited return to One Piece, and we are going to dive deeply into that in the next video. This man is unstoppable. I did not expect this. Blackbeard, you are ridiculous, you are terrifying, you are oddly dressed, and I love it. Just like Trafalgar Law's chest, this chapter had two huge developments, both related to rather large men. But there is insanity here happening right from the cover page. In fact, I got a comment from someone saying that I had spoiled this chapter last time by applying, quote, basic logic, because Charlotte Pudding has been kidnapped. And not only that, but a sweet commander has been beaten by a man who is almost certainly Kuzan. It's alright though, because it's just Cracker, and no one really cares about Cracker. Except here, actually. You know what, Cracker? I care. Because he's all like reaching out, and you can tell that Pudding was probably right there in front of him as he got frozen in despair. And ice, but mostly despair. And seeing Brûlé despairing in the background hits kind of hard as well. Ever since discovering her backstory and just how important family is within her segment, I really do empathize quite a lot with her. With that said, this might just be the Katakuri fanboy speaking here, but if Blackbeard has taken his sister and Luffy needs to punch Blackbeard anyway, then why not use that as an excuse for a bit of the old alliancing? Regardless though, we are really tightening this narrative noose. Blackbeard is about to get his hands on a bunch of poneglyph rubbings and also now has a way to read them. Just like a putrid blob of dough in an oven, Blackbeard is rising and expanding into the final antagonist that we've always been promised. And I am both excited and terrified for what's to come. It's new outfit day because it's that time of the arc where the Straw Hats get to fully immerse themselves on the new island. This is one of my favorite parts of arc beginnings because it gives us a nice new fresh set of visuals, and in the new world era, I think that's very essential. No offense to Wano, I love the arc dearly, but I was really starting to feel that feudal Japan fatigue. And it's amazing how we've just gone completely in the other direction now, basically into full-on sci-fi. With that said, my favorite outfit is definitely the least sci-fi one of them, and it's obviously Jinbei. This guy, man, he looks superb in a Hawaiian shirt. And I think it was the previous chapter where I said that Jinbei feels a lot like a parent to the theme park, and this shirt only solidifies that feeling. Like Jinbei has taken his kids on a holiday to Futureland. I can't say I'm overly sold on Luffy's outfit initially because it feels a little bit basic to me, although I'll definitely wait to see what the actual color scheme is before passing final judgment. I think it looks a bit bland to me right now because all I can really see is Luffy in a black dress, but depending on what the colors are, this could be really cool. I think Chopper executes this idea a lot better because he has that all-important helmet accessory to really complete the look, and the same goes for Bonnie. Her outfit has a lot more detail than Luffy's. It also has a lot more thigh, so maybe that's played into my first impressions as well. Bonnie in general was a fantastic experience in this chapter though. In such a short amount of time, she has become such a solid crew ally, always willing to engage in whatever weird crap Luffy wants to do, because for most of that time, that weird crap is also what Bonnie wants to do. But perhaps she was getting along with the crew a little bit too well, because things took a very sudden dramatic turn with the appearance of Kuma. The appearance of the pacifista really, but you know what I mean. And I will say that Kuma is becoming a very, very tough lad to keep track of, because this entire arc so far is like browsing through the skins on a character selection screen. You know, we have Kuma Classic, then we have Mini Winged Kuma, and now for a limited time only, a special Halloween Policeman Kuma. Kuma is somehow the man we know the least about but have seen the most of. God, he's such a crazy enigma. But after all of this time, this chapter gave us the most insight into Kuma that we have ever had. And it was when we saw that brief flashback of him holding up the ever adorable little Bonnie. I mean, just look at this man. He's almost unrecognizable as Bartholomew Kuma, because he's actually showing some degree of emotion. Quite a large degree of emotion, actually. But to the best of my knowledge, we have never seen Kuma emote in any way, shape, or form before now. Like seriously, I've had my artists make images of Kuma with emotional expressions that I almost never use because they just never feel right to use. This whole scene was heartbreaking though. In particular, there were two key Bonnie panels that just stopped me right in my tracks. The first was when the pacifista fired and we cut to her with this completely blank expression, which I suppose is fitting as the daughter of Kuma. But it was very impactful because it tells the whole story right then and there. This is Bonnie being directly confronted with the two conflicting elements that make up confrontation, because for some reason I wrote it in the script twice. But those conflicting elements of loving her father and about to be brutally murdered also by her father. I mean, obviously it's not the original Kuma, but logical thoughts like that don't particularly matter in a situation like this. Hence why Bonnie chose to, I suppose, save the pacifista from Luffy. And then we get that amazing panel of Bonnie begging Luffy not to hurt her father, which is a panel that Oda clearly gave a lot more time and effort than others because everything here is shaded to perfection. The depth of Bonnie's face transforms what is usually a flat, goofy aesthetic into a more real experience. So this might be just a bit of artsy wankery, but look, if you were watching me, then you probably knew what you were getting yourself into. But when Oda wants to make us really feel for characters, he brings his art one step closer to realism, just to make that more human connection. Also, I'd be lying if I said this wasn't heavily evocative of Robin's iconic I Want to Live panel, where you can see the same sort of effect happening. There's a lot more detail, shading, and imperfections on Robin's face. Granted, that was Oda's art style in 2006, which looks like super simple and flat now, and it's moments like these where you can really see just how far he's evolved as an artist. But another thing I found really cool about this whole scene is that Luffy used Future Sight not once but twice. The first was when he correctly predicted that Officer Manborg was going to charge at them. The second is significantly more interesting though, because if you look carefully, Luffy predicted Bonnie attacking him before she actually did it. But he let the attack land anyway, which I think is a nice subtle moment. Luffy saw the attack, but he also knew that there was no real hostile intent behind Bonnie's actions, so he decided to just let the situation play out. And the two things I love about it is we get to see Luffy's emotional maturity on full display, and it's not all that often that we get to see that, just in key moments. But also, I love every time he uses Future Sight because it makes me think back to the days of Whole Cake Island, and I'm like, you know what, that whole arc, it really was worth it. Plus, for the first time in the actual manga, we get a taste of how Bonnie fights. Although we have seen her in action before in One Piece Stampede, where she did more or less the exact same thing to Douglas Bullet as she did here to Luffy. Except in Stampede, Bonnie did something really cool by grabbing some eggs and then aging them into fully grown birds to distract Bullet first. All in all though, Oda is doing a phenomenal job of continuing to make me more and more invested in this Bonnie Kuma story, and I cannot wait to see where it goes. But I will, because right now we have much bigger events to discuss. So I went into this chapter thinking that we were going to get another nice casually paced beginning of an arc laid back adventure chapter. Holy crap, was I wrong. Blackbeard versus Law came out of nowhere. Not only did I not predict this matchup, at least not this soon, but it is just so rare to cut from an isolated Straw Hat adventure to greater world events. That's just not a thing that happens, but it does seriously add to the tension of the arc. Because yeah, we're having what seems like a delightful side quest on future Funland, but the rest of the world right now is locked in serious endgame fight battling. And I'm gonna go ahead and say rip Trafalgar Law because he has no chance of coming out of this victorious. A 3 billion berry bounty? That's great. But the problem with the Heart Pirates is that, well, they kind of suck. Like every member of Luffy's crew, I think is worth at least 1 Trafalgar Law each. So the Straw Hats have like 10 laws, whilst Law only has 1 law, and that's not enough laws. Those are especially bad numbers because Law himself is a support fighter. He really does not do well in one-on-one combat against people with haki strong enough to combat all of his Rumu shenanigans. I think this can only end one of 2 ways. 1, Law loses and gets captured by Blackbeard. And hey, maybe he even gets to share a cell with Kobe. Or 2, Law is miraculously saved by someone else, like how Hancock was saved by Ray Lee, but I think that just might be optimistic thinking. I can't imagine Law escaping because that would mean leaving the Heart Pirates behind, and also the Blackbeard Pirates seem to have done an amazing tactical job of isolating Law so that he really has nowhere to run. And here's the worst part. Right now, his powers don't even matter. Because Van Alga with his fun new devil fruit serves as a counter. Like say Burgess gets caught in Law's room. Oh no, I'm in a room. So what? Olga just teleports him out of it. Pop. And I'm not sure how much I should fear for his life narratively because this is One Piece. I'm going to go ahead and say not at all. But looking at this situation without that greater context, on the one hand, why would Blackbeard not just kill him right here and now to take the Ope Ope no Mi? But then again, on the other hand, Blackbeard may know about the Ope Ope no Mi and take Law prisoner with the Doflamingo agenda of somehow forcing him to perform the perpetual youth surgery. Along with the new Straw Hat designs though, the Blackbeard pirates have had some changes themselves, especially Burgess, who was quite the shock with his half-steampunk face. And this may just be because this is a bit of a Kuma-heavy arc, but Burgess actually reminds me a lot of Oda's original design for Kuma, sporting that same kind of steampunky half-face, just without the steering wheel and the head that would eventually be inherited by Golden Land Shiki. I imagine the need for this mask is because Sabo burned the ever-loving crap out of his face. Although if that is the case, why not just revert back to your paper bag, Burgess? I really did enjoy you a lot more when you were wearing that. Jokes aside, Burgess is great. The dude has been horrendously disfigured, but he's still just loving life, hee-hawing everywhere and just making the most of everything he has. And you know what? I think that we can all learn an important lesson from this brutal murder man. Van Alga has also undergone a transformation, sort of, because he has a small pencil beard now, which is it's a bit of an underwhelming post-time skip design. Because that's a thing, this is the first time that we've seen Van Alga's face post-time skip. We waited 12 years for this. Now, to be fair, the only physical transformation I've made in the last 2 years has been the growth of a small beard, so who am I to judge? Also, it was amazing to see Doc Q and Stronger again. Oda did a great job of making these two of all characters feel threatening, in a very strange way, mind you. Due to the vagueness of Doc Q's new Devil Fruit abilities, we were treated and or subjected to the gender-swapped Heart Pirates, thus making Trafalgar officially canon. Which, if you don't remember, Oda went through a bit of a phase of drawing almost every major character gender-swapped, and of course, Law was no exception. But I have to say, for once in my life, I really do properly fear Blackbeard. Now that Big Mom and Kaido are gone, he is rapidly gaining momentum and becoming an unstoppable snowball of darkness. Although this chapter did touch on something very, very important, which was that moment where Law used his Haki to dispel Doc Q's fruit abilities. There's something to be said for Blackbeard's strategy of attaining power via primarily fruit-based methodology, and that thing to be said is that all of this could be for nothing if someone has the Haki, or I suppose the willpower, strong enough to nullify them all. I mean, it's kind of exactly like what Blackbeard can do with the Yami Yami no Mi. He cancels out fruit powers. And maybe Teach specifically needed that ability because his own willpower was too fragile and weak to ever do the same thing with Haki. So I'm starting to see an endgame fight where Blackbeard nullifies Luffy's fruit abilities, but then Luffy also nullifies Blackbeard's fruit abilities. Which, but how does that even work? I mean, if I nullify your nullification, does that mean that I am no longer nullified? Whatever the case, we have just been introduced to a whole host of the world's most powerful devil fruits all in one go, and we'll be diving into each and every one of them in the next video. The battle between the worst generation is on. No more emperors, no more pushy marines, and best of all for Blackbeard, no menacing Silver's Rayleigh. This is it. This is the One Piece that we've been waiting for since the very beginning. What we're seeing right now is the worst generation equivalent of the pre-Pirate King days. The free-for-all chaotic conflicts to determine who becomes the Pirate King and who gets a steering wheel jammed right there in their head. It really was all or nothing back in those days. But look, I actually have an apology to make. I sincerely apologize to the Heart Pirates for not at all believing in their ability to combat the Blackbeard Pirates. Lore aside, I never expected them to do this well, especially with all of the amazing teamwork that was happening. Oh, that was so cool. I previously called Lore a support character, and look, I do stand by that. But rather fittingly, the support captain has an entire support crew, which turns these individually less than amazing building blocks into the foundation of a punch-fighting powerhouse. Now, to be fair, I think this is because they're showing during the raid was, well, what's less than 0? Whatever it is, it was that. To be fair, we got some great insight into their sea-based expertise, once again quite fitting because they do travel via submarine, and Onigashima was noticeably not at all water-focused. Quite the opposite, really, so taking the Heart Pirates and putting them in the raid is kind of like taking a fish and expecting them to fight in the air. Then again, that's exactly what Kaido did, so you know what? No excuses, Heart Pirates, no excuses. But speaking of sea fights, is it weird that I actually thought this was a novel situation? For a 25-year-old manga focused on pirates, the idea of winning by sinking your opponent's ship somehow feels feels like a very fresh idea. And you can see this style of thinking on display at all times. The Heart Pirates know that they cannot take a full-on fight, so they're fully invested in tactics, right down to when Law sliced up stronger. I did find it very interesting that he didn't go for Blackbeard or even Doc Q, but it was clever because taking away Stronger forces Blackbeard onto the ground and makes it a lot harder for him to protect the ship. It was a very nice tactical maneuver, although I do feel bad for Stronger. He's just a Pegasus who fell in with a bit of a bad crowd. I mean, maybe, I don't actually know. Maybe Stronger is some sort of evil horse, although I feel like a truly evil horse would at least have a twirly, villainous mustache. This whole situation does remind me a bit of the Vassals versus Kaido though. You know, they had that one chapter of Glory where people overreacted and said, Vassals powerful day, they are going to beat Kaido. And then a couple of chapters later, they were just swimming in a pool of their own blood. However, swimming in pools of blood may actually play right into the hands of the Heart Pirates with their aquatic affinity. So a question I think we now need to ask is, what the hell is up with Shachi? Is he part fishman? Because the attack that he, for want of a better word, spewed was very reminiscent of someone like Chu. And plus he does have that fun decorative fin on his hat. Or at least I thought it was decorative. I mean, otherwise the dude is just really good at sucking. The most exciting part of this fight for me though was when Law used the R room or the Re room again. And initially I thought that he may be using the same variant that he did with Big Mom, placing Blackbeard in a silent room, and maybe that somehow countering his quake vibrations. I mean, that's all sound is, literally vibrations. So if Law can eliminate sounds, then in theory he can eliminate vibrations. Maybe, I don't know. Again, I'm probably just thinking way too deeply about fictional fruit. Once again though, we've been given a big old flag that Blackbeard is all in on the Devil Fruit hand at this Pirate King poker table, which is such an interesting contradiction because for this whole post-time skip era, we have been seriously focused on Haki. I mean, even Kaido was like, hey, you know what, magical fruit doesn't matter. Magical Haki, that's a different story. So why would someone like Blackbeard, poised to become the main big bad dude guy of this whole series, go all in on the lesser power system? Right now, the only answer I can come up with is that he's compensating. We still have yet to have any confirmation that Blackbeard has Conqueror's Haki. Some people do mistakenly believe he does because the Gura Gura powers look very similar to the Black Lightning effect. But imagine a situation where Blackbeard is lacking this key aspect of Haki. He wasn't born with it, so he can't train or develop it. And what would you do in that situation? You would compensate with what you can control and concoct a recipe for the world's worst fruit salad. But Blackbeard could very much be a fake it till you make it kind of guy. You know, someone who has that ambition but wasn't born with the qualities of a king. And in a weird way, that would make him almost inspirational. Just your everyday dude fighting desperately against fate. Legally changing his name to place a D in the middle just to see if that's the secret to unlocking Conqueror's Haki, but alas, it is not. And thus, he still needs to make his way to the top with only what he's got, which isn't much, except for a pudding. Right now, he has some pudding. Pudding's appearance in this chapter is an absolute first for One Piece. To have someone featured in the cover story, but then also crossing into the main story is wild, and must have required some serious coordination from Oda. This chapter is like a parallel narrative. We're following Pudding's story in the past and in the present, which is kind of appropriate given her memory-focused devil fruit. But Van Ogre also makes this leap, and I'd like to think it's because his warp powers are just so strong that they allowed him to warp from the cover story into the main story. Pudding's scene is very interesting because it re-raises the question over whether or not Big Mom and Kaido are dead, and we'll get to that, but first. Blackbeard is setting himself up to essentially declare war on the entire planet. Every move he makes manages to make an enemy of a new faction, and combined with the tear-it-all-down attitude of Dragon and the general volatility of Sakazuki, I think things are going to escalate very quickly from here, because our previous pillars of stability are all probably mostly dead. Speaking of Sakazuki, he does make an appearance here wearing his trademark Justice Chastity belt because he is unable to act in this scenario as per usual. I kind of love that Sakazuki's whole post-time skip arc so far has just been about realizing that, you know what, being in charge sucks. It's just endless administration and politics and resource management. Like, I never would have figured that the man who killed Ace and fought one-on-one with Whitebeard would just spend the last 12 years behind a desk fighting his greatest foe of all, general administration. One small detail I noticed that I'm certain no one else will care about is that I'm trying to figure out who Sakazuki was talking to on the Denden Mushi. It's intriguing because it has an upwardly pointed mustache, and there's only one Marine in the series that I know of who sports that look, and his name is Rear Admiral Sicily. Now, he has an interesting story because Sicily doesn't actually exist in the anime. In the manga, he appeared during the initial Sabati arc, reporting to Sengoku about all of the auction house shenaniganry, but for whatever reason in the anime, they replaced him with this unnamed brown-clothed Marine. It's one of those things that no one cares about because he's such a minor character, but I find it fascinating because there was just no reason to replace him. It's just one of those weird production mysteries. Moving back to Egghead Island, Bonnie was able to use her fruit quite ingeniously here by changing everyone's ages and thus messing with the pacifista's visual recognition system. Young Jinbei looks adorable and like a bit of a troublemaker, but adorable. And what happened with Luffy was legitimately mind-blowing to me because that was no mere old man. Bonnie transformed Luffy into his Dark Timeline older self, which I think may give us some insight into how Bonnie's powers function. The thing about the Dark Timeline Straw Hats is that they can more accurately be referred to as the unremarkable timeline, the one where nobody pursues their dreams. And with Bonnie's fruit, I suspect it ages people up by assuming that no progress will be made with that person between now and however old she decides to make them, which is why Luffy turns into his unremarkable self instead of a more powerhouse Garp-style older gentleman. It also makes me question how Bonnie's powers work in reverse, because it's easy to answer that question with someone like Jinbei, it works adorably, but much less so with someone like Frankie. If Bonnie reverts his age, would that mean taking him back to having a fully human body? Or would it take what we have today and turn him into a mini child cyborg? Or in the darker scenario, does it only de-age the parts of Frankie that remain human? I think it's one of the latter two, because otherwise I'm sure that this whole Kuma deal wouldn't be such a big issue. Bonnie finds Kuma and reverts him back to being human, which if it could happen, probably would have occurred during the reverie. And then there is the mystery of Kuma's race, as if this guy needed more intrigue. This has me kind of thrown because originally I was like, oh, maybe he's a Lunarian. And perhaps Vegapunk used that to make the Seraphim rather than King's DNA. But then why isn't Bonnie Lunarian unless Bonnie was adopted? But then if she was adopted, why does she look exactly like the Queen Dowager when she ages up? Questions. So many questions. There's a lot more Kuma history that comes out of this as well, like his path to becoming a Manborg. He was a king, then his revolutionary ties were ousted, bad king, and so he was given a choice of either die or die slower and more machiney in nature. And this doesn't even come close to answering any of the big Kuma mysteries, but we are inching ever slower. Oh, and also Bonnie found a lightsaber, which is cool. Oda is actually a big Star Wars fan, and One Piece even did a special cross-promotion when Episode 7 came out. And to deepen our sci-fi themes, the Vegapunk technology was expanded upon, specifically with anti-gravity devices this time. And look, I won't go too deeply into it again, but a lot of this is very much continuing to scream a future moon adventure to me. Very importantly though, we have some more new Straw Hat outfits. This is important to me because we get to tick off our very first Frankie bingo box, because we officially have a new Frankie hairstyle. So we are going to celebrate in the traditional way with this not at all identifiable cola product. Yes. Super, indeed. With the new outfits though, Frankie is nothing short of glorious. But you know what? It does actually feel kind of weird to see him with pants on. Meanwhile, Nami and Robin have gone in the exact opposite direction, completely pants off. And look, at some point, a man in his 30s does need to stop simping over comic book characters. And maybe that day will be tomorrow, because it ain't today. However, Usopp has by far my favorite outfit. I just think he looks so damn cool with the jacket and everything, plus his existing affinity to headphones makes him slip seamlessly into this aesthetic. Now as for Sanji, I do think we should have expected this. The Hawaiian shirt is definitely his vibe and it makes me very nostalgic for Skypiea, as does the literal Sky Island in the chapter. Seeing Frankie interact with the clouds was crazy because it's one of those situations where you have these two established elements of One Piece that have never even come close to mixing before. Plus the most minor callback in all of narrative history. Pyrobloin is mentioned in the story for the second time, for some reason. Pyrobloin is the particle that lets you form sea clouds as well as one of the main components of sea stone. Why do we need to know about it? We don't, but you do. And then we have a stunningly unexpected conversation with Dragon. At least I'm assuming it's the dragon because there are lots of dragons in One Piece. But this was a really down way to end the chapter and setting up quite an ominous future. Because to me, it doesn't sound like Vegapunk is predicting his death via natural causes. I don't think anyone really needs to be a genius to figure that out. It seems more along the lines that Vegapunk is so smart that he can predict the world government coming to assassinate him, and he can also predict that there is very, very little he can do about it. But also, let's not forget that he is just having a casual chit-chat with the world's most wanted man, and I wonder if all Vegapunks have this relationship with Dragon, or if it's just the specific aspect of Shaka. In any case, this is starting to make clear to us that Vegapunk has always been wary of the world government, which I think is fair considering they imprisoned him and forced him to work for them, but despite that, he has been one of their primary assets. And maybe there's a world, and maybe that world is this one, where Vegapunk has programmed all of the Pacifista to do something like, say, respond to Dragon's command, and we end up inheriting a whole army of Kuma. Because course, it's becoming hard to imagine that he just made all of these weapons for them without any kind of foresight into how they were going to be used, especially since he's such a genius that he can predict his own death. So surely he should be able to predict the millions of deaths of others from his death machines. But whatever the case, the tale of Vegapunk's impending doom will have to wait. However, I do have a lot to say about the potential death of Big Mom and Kaido, which we will be covering in the next video. Jinbei versus Jinbei. Fire versus water. Father versus son, sort of. And fish versus flying mecha fish. All of that is a thing that could apparently happen. In fact, so many massive things have just happened. For example, is that their Seraphim using a devil fruit? And if so, what happened to my precious baby man? And also that teeny tiny confirmation that One Piece does not exist in a world in the past. It is in fact in the far future. So that has literally changed everything. But as part of our science-based shenaniganry, this pod of the Straw Hats encountered Seraph Jinbei, which of course resulted in fight battling. A really cool fight scene, actually. In general, I can just never get enough of the Straw Hats working together. And it happens so rarely because they have this tendency to just isolate themselves in one-on-ones, but they make such an amazing team. The highlight of the fight was definitely Robin. I love that death glare she gave Seraph Jinbei when he hurt Nami. And it gave me these real chills, even though she didn't use Demonio during the fight, Devil Child Nico Robin was still on full display here. I'm also really starting to get into her new techniques. I like how the Sea Serpent attack kind of mimics Luffy's stretching to the best of Robin's abilities. That's something I didn't really pick up on during her fight with Black Maria, but it's a perfect adoption for Robin as a distance fighter. This whole conflict came with a very potent shot of nostalgia though, particularly for the Sabadi days, because this is not the first time that the Straw Hats have faced off against a Vegapunk convention and have had a lot of difficulty beating it. And I do think that was intentional. Pre-time skip, the Straw Hats pretty seriously struggled to take down a single pacifista. Then post-time skip, they're basically one-shotting them. So this is Oda showing us the true scale of the Seraphim abilities. They aren't just a slight improvement. They've taken our post-time skip crew and made them feel almost as helpless as the pre-time skip days. These things are a legitimate threat. So much so that the bulk of the crew of an Emperor of the Sea is having a rough time against just one. So imagine the force that the Seraphim would be as a group of 7, or however many of them there are. With this particular one, deemed Seraphim number 4, I believe, I really enjoyed the Straw Hat reactions, jumping from the idea that he was Jinbei's son, and then immediately to the thought that, oh no, Jinbei has turned into a child maybe. And to be fair to Nami, that's not actually the worst guess in this world. I don't think it's a bad guess at all, actually, because there are so many crazy abilities in One Piece that you can never count any scenario out. And in fact, on Egghead Island right now, we have Jewelry Bonnie, who could literally bring that idea into reality by transforming Jinbei into a child, which she did, but not this child. And that makes me wonder if in the future this cohort of the crew are going to encounter the real Jinbei affected by Bonnie's powers and then mistake him for a seraph in some sort of comical scene. Also, just a small narrative thing. This plot point is why Oda had Bonnie change Jinbei into a child rather than an old man. It's planting that image of child Jinbei in the reader's minds before we even encounter his seraph. Because most casual readers aren't entrenched in the SBS segments and know back to front what all of the warlords look like as kids, so it's another one of those very small decisions that shows how carefully Oda considers constructing his story and making it hit the readers as hard as it possibly can. Now, there's a lot of potential for fun future scenarios when you start involving things like clones. For example, I'm really keen to see how Jinbei will react to this. It really could go in any direction, like a full-on, that's disgusting, how dare you bring this thing into the world. Or it could go all the way to, come here, let me embrace my son. Come here, my me. If it was my clone, I feel like I'd feel some degree of responsibility. I'd have a really hard time leaving him at a lab to be used as a weapon, but I also don't know just how deeply Oda wants to dive into the morality aspect of non-consensual cloning. Let's talk about something that worries me even more. Seraph Jinbei appears to be a devil fruit user, and there are multiple explanations for how, but right now it looks like he's using Senor Pink's devil fruit, the swim fruit, which was flagged by Frankie. And the first of our possibilities is that after Dressrosa, Senor Pink was caught, executed, and the devil fruit shipped off to Vegapunk to implant into the Seraph. That would be probably definitely the most morbid outcome. It could happen though, because Oda is getting a little bit more willing to kill characters, especially off screen. And we haven't seen anything from Senor Pink since he was beaten on Dressrosa. We did see a shot of him and Frankie on the cover of 1021, but that was an art request. Another option would be that Vegapunk had the chance to study Senor Pink since he was captured, as he often does with pirates that are captured, your Kaidos, your Kings, etc. And in much the same way that Vegapunk managed to, in my opinion, pretty much perfectly replicate Kaido's fruit, he's been able to do the same thing with Senor Pink's fruit. So the artificial Jinbei could be using a new artificial fruit, which is huge actually, because that would be the first artificial fruit to replicate a non-Zoan effect. Or we could be skipping the fruit stage entirely, with Vegapunk diving into the DNA of the Seraphim and manipulating their lineage factor directly via the power of fictional science. Because in theory, if Vegapunk Vegapunk understands the code change that the devil fruit makes, then he could find a way to replicate that code without using the fruit itself. Again, this is purely fictional science, but I imagine that if you can study the DNA of the devil fruit user and note all of the changes and differences, and then if you're like really good at sciencing, manipulate existing DNA to replicate those changes that the fruit would make. I love the power that was chosen for Seraph Jinbei though, because Oda once revealed what devil fruit each of the Straw Hats would eat, and when it came to Jinbei, he said that he would be a Toritorizoan, so one of the bird fruits. The idea being that Jinbei would need to make up for not being able to swim, so he would want to fly. However, with those Lunarian wings, Seraph Jinbei can fly by default. So now, to make up for not being able to swim, Jinbei would want to be able to swim. And given that he can still use Fishman Karate, I think there is a great argument to be made that should Kaido be dead, Seraph Jinbei could be considered the strongest creature in the world. On land, sea, and air, he is said to be the strongest creature alive. If it's one-on-one, always bet on baby Jinbei. This opens up a ton of exciting possibilities for the other Seraphim though, because we could end up seeing a one-piece pick and mix of traditional warlords using different devil fruit powers, depending on either what Vegapunk deems suits them better, or just what the world government has available at the time. It's very much limitless. Any warlord could be paired with any fruit that Vegapunk has had the chance to study. So I love everything that's being set up here. Something unexpected is that this chapter also dumped a gaggle of new Vegapunks on top of us, introducing us to Edison, Pythagoras, and York in a very fun comedic scene. Oda has this habit when it comes to introducing groups. He'll start by showing us one really cool character, then maybe another, and then it's just here, have the rest. They're all weird as crap. Enjoy. So it's both expected and unexpected because it's quite a typical Oda scene, but at the same time I don't think anyone ever expects to be confronted with two robots who share the same third-party mechanism of eating, sleeping, and defecating. And on that, let's start with York, the Vegapunk of Desire. Her life seems pretty damn intense. Like, you would think that being able to eat, drink, and sleep all day, like that sounds quite relaxing, like you're in a zoo, but not to see the animals, for people to see you. But when you're eating, sleeping, and again, defecating for six whole people, then that sounds like a really intense life. And York would probably even give Magellan a challenge for the amount of time spent in the bathroom, thus commencing a sort of very unpleasant throne war. York is like the productivity dream though. Being able to cast aside those basic human needs that always cost time, so much time, is something I've often wished I had access to. Meanwhile, Pythagoras and Edison are adorable. I love these funky little science robots. They give me some very Akira Toriyama vibes because he always enjoyed drawing very curvy robots with childlike expressions. I actually wouldn't be surprised if they were based on some sort of classic Japanese mecha that I'm not aware of because I am an English-speaking swine, but it would make sense because Oda is introducing a lot of old-school popular culture in this arc, which is an interesting and shockingly appropriate statement in and of itself. The island of the future, made up of pop culture from the past. Before we get to that, Edison's role seems to be the inspiration guy. He's the one who comes up with all of the new amazing ideas. Meanwhile, Pythagoras is the workhorse who meticulously implements everything. York and Atlas seem to handle more basic human needs, like all of the desires and emotions, specifically rage in the case of Atlas, I guess. Meanwhile, it looks like Shaka and Lilith embody exact opposite ends of the moral compass of Vegapunk. Shaka taking on the general good, and Lilith being the incarnation of evil. Thinking about it, it says a lot that even though Lilith is the evil one, she's not actually that evil. I feel like I'd describe her as more mischievous with the ability and willingness to kill. That's pretty important. But still, it tells me that the original Vegapunk was probably far more good than he was evil. However, did everyone notice the special 7th Vegapunk in this chapter? One very fun moment was when Usopp admitted that he was also Vegapunk. It was a very small gag, but Usopp's lies, no matter what the scale, do have a tendency to come true in some form or another. It's just what he does. The man is a prophet. Even his unintentional lies often find a way to manifest into reality, so I could see this coming back down the line, probably nothing important, and it's nothing I'm going to heavily speculate on now. But just note, it has been added to the Book of Nostradamus. And then we come to the twist that could redefine this entire series. The fact that the Great Kingdom was a civilization more advanced than what we are today, and that the world of One Piece takes place in a dystopian regressed future. Now, I use the word twist, but this is actually not entirely unexpected. In fact, if you follow the cover stories, it's very much expected. When Enno went to the moon, he discovered an ancient race of these adorable space cyborgs, showing us that hyper-advanced technology has existed for, well, who knows how many years, hundreds, perhaps even thousands. These also happen to be the same type of cyborgs that were built on Vegapunk's home of Karakuri Island, and also more than likely the same type of cyborgs that are currently being shrouded as the various assistants of Egghead Island. But all of this makes Vegapunk such a fascinating character to me, because he isn't some inspired genius looking into the future. He's still a genius, but he's focusing on figuring out how to replicate the past. It's very Frankie-like, really. He discovered the remains of Vegapunk's lab and used his research to further his own technology. Meanwhile, Vegapunk himself is in very much the same position, discovering the technology of an even greater scientist, and has been using that to further his own inventions, although even he is unable to reach the heights of the past. You know, maybe it was that original scientist or group of sciencing people who created devil fruits to begin with. With each and every development, it feels like we take one step towards the idea that all devil fruits are artificial. All of them are grown in a lab, and the only reason why the world considers them cursed fruit is because science, too advanced for people to understand, is always going to be written off as magic. What I'm really keen to learn is just how much the world government knows about this ancient technology. Like, did they deliver these devices to Vegapunk to study, or has he acquired them in secret somehow? But combining this with the impending death aspect, I imagine that someone will be required to finish whatever mission Vegapunk has in this world. Perhaps someone very specifically Frankie-shaped, maybe. Because when you think about it, if Vegapunk doesn't exist, then that automatically makes Frankie one of the leading engineers in the world. I mean, yes, we've got our judges and our Caesars, but their specialty lies more in biology and chemistry. And it feels like Void Century answers are well within reach here. Vegapunk probably knows quite a bit, although I would expect his ultimate answer to be something like, yeah, look, this happened, but I don't know how or why, because we still need to save our final answers for when Robin discovers them through the assorted history cubes. And then there's Caribou. I don't even say that as a joke. He's been let loose on Egghead Island, or more accurately told to F off in the nicest way possible. But what is his purpose? What has ever been his purpose? I am ever so curious to find out why he is legitimately the most important post-time skip character apart from the core Straw Hats. That answer is coming very, very soon. O'Hara lives. This is huge. One Piece has given us all of the lore combined with all of the feelings, and to top it off, a head whose top is nigh on impossible to determine. This is one of those times where One Piece just had me in stunned silence. There is so much packed in here. Too much, potentially too much. I feel like I have Vegapunk's head, which looks like it could explode at any moment. And I dare say that this is the big revelation of the chapter. After encountering the 6 other Vegapunks, turns out it's lucky number 7 that finally shows us the man we've been waiting to see ever since he was first alluded to on Alabasta. So I've been reading this series weekly since 2005. Yes, I am old. And for most of the time between now and then, there has been a lot of weird Vegapunk fan art. And I can't help but feel like everyone was simultaneously bang on about his design and yet completely incorrect. And to make matters even more interesting, we are introduced to 2 different true Vegapunk designs. Both take clear inspiration from Einstein. In fact, when this chapter came out, Einstein was even trending on Twitter as a result. Although the apple on the head is either a biblical reference or a nod to Isaac Newton. Because along with Steve Jobs, Isaac Newton is the guy most closely associated with apples. And now, if I recall science correctly, Isaac Newton is the guy who went, hey guys, I think that there might be a gravity, whereas Einstein is the one who said, bang on, mate, and furthermore, here's how it works. I do think that Vegapunk's design is probably going to be very polarizing at first, because even for One Piece, it's a bit out there and maybe a wacky overload. I personally love it. In fact, I like his younger version even more because that head is amazing. I love that Oda is willing to step into aesthetic territory that could possibly tank the careers of most mangaka. That head is just so damn big. In fact, you know what? Let's do some science. I'm intrigued to know exactly how long it takes a camera to pan from Vegapunk's face to the top of his head, and oh my crap, it's a surprisingly long time. So long that I'm running out of things to say to fill the time. And finally, there it is. The weird thing is that as crazy as Vegapunk is, Oda still has this magic storytelling ability to make me take Vegapunk 100% seriously. Because remember that in the context of this chapter, he's visiting the site of a recent genocide. And even with the head and the tongue, I still look at this flashback and I go, damn, this is heavy, just like your head. Seeing young Dragon was incredibly unexpected, and the conversation between Dragon and Vegapunk absolutely captivated me. I was also really touched by the small memorial they made from a piece of the Tree of Knowledge. It was tragically sweet, like serving gummy bears at a funeral. And I know there's so much to get to here, but first up, young Professor Clover. Of all of the characters I never expected to receive any sort of backstory expansion on, he's definitely one of the ones, if not the one. But I love his younger form. He looks so adventurous and happy. In this moment sailing the world, he perfectly reflects both Luffy and Roger, very much embodying his own personal Joy Boy spirit. He also must have been an absolute beast back in the day. Sailing these seas is not easy. There are like powerful people and creatures and stuff. And it takes a certain level of strength to sail through the Grand Line, which assumedly Clover did because his mission was worldwide. So he pretty much Indiana Jonesed himself into becoming the world's most famous archaeologist. And I'd be incredibly curious to see more of his era, because Clover is so old that he would have been sailing long before the birth of infamous characters like Whitebeard and Roger, and I really do wonder what the world was like in the era prior to those dominant names. A lot of what happened here also recontextualizes how we see O'Hara. In Robin's flashback, I always got the feeling of desperate futility with the scholars throwing all of the books into the water, like it was pure tragedy. But now I look back on that and go, you absolute legends. In your final moments, you have changed the fate of the entire world. Let's talk about what could be arguably the biggest reveal of the chapter, which is that Jaguar D Soul is alive. Because usually this is the sort of thing that would annoy me. Fake deaths are my most disliked aspect of One Piece. I despise them, and I think that Oda can often be very greedy and incredibly clunky when implementing them. But I can't help feel differently about Soul, and I think a lot of that has to do with Robin. Here I can't help but be happy because seeing the evolution of expressions on Robin's face was a roller coaster. It started out reopening an old wound and making Robin genuinely sad, and then those tears transformed into eyes lit up with a spark of hope. And finally, they became tears of joy when Robin realized that Soul was alive. It was so good. I don't think I've been more emotionally touched by a One Piece character moment since Robin's I Want to Live. And because it's Robin, Oda really has to nail this with masterful subtlety. Because there is precedence for flashback figures who are supposed to be dead being alive, specifically with Luffy and Sabo. However, Oda can't go all out here with a Luffy NL style expression. It just feels human, and I can't help but heavily empathize with her. Rather hilariously, this also wraps up a lesser known conflict, because Soul's death was something of a touchy topic on the One Piece wiki, specifically between two wiki editors, Justin and Joe Kiddo, who had an argument in the Soul discussion section where Joe said, "Oh come on Justin, Soul is dead and that's the fact. So please stop trying to be full of yourself and leave Soul in the dead category, okay? Peace out, man." To which Justin replied, "You're talking to me about being full of himself, Joe? You're the one who said flat out that we should all just shut up and let you run the wiki and do whatever you like. I don't think you have much room to talk on this particular matter." In any case, let the record show that Justin was correct on this matter. Soul should not have been put in the dead section. But I think part of why this all hits me so strongly is because whenever any slobby becomes relevant again, it just it sends a wave of nostalgia my way. It takes me back to reading One Piece as a teenager in high school, so that era will always probably have a much more powerful effect on me. It also makes the Robin versus Black Maria fight much more interesting in retrospect, specifically when Black Maria summoned the illusions of Soul, Olvia, and Clover, because in that moment, Robin had well and truly accepted that all three of them were gone. It was a great character moment, but it was also very narratively clever, because now that Soul is alive and O'Hara is becoming extremely relevant, you can see that this wasn't just a one-off character moment that Oda included. He did this specifically to seed O'Hara in the mind brains of the readers. Knowing that Egghead was up next, it was a very sneaky way of going, "Hey, remember these O'Hara characters? They were pretty great, weren't they?" Oh no, I'm not bringing them up for any specific reason, but just between you and me, just to keep them in mind, okay? And as a result, one of the things I'm now most looking forward to in the future is the inevitable reunion of Robin and Soul, in much the same way that I'm eagerly anticipating Brook and Laboon. You know, I don't think I've ever actually noticed this until now, but it makes perfect sense that a lot of Robin's ultimate attacks are based on giant limbs. Because as a child, Soul was the strongest person she knew, so of course she's going to go about replicating that strength in her own way. Soul also led a group of giants to retrieve the O'Hara books, which is fun for two reasons. One, because he got giants from Elbaf and took the books back to Elbaf. Soul himself is not from Elbaf. He's from a completely different tribe of giants somewhere out there in the place that is the world. That's all we know. He even considered the customs of Elbaf to be barbaric. So it's just an intriguing note that he turned to them. And secondly, we actually know all of the giants that were seen retrieving the books. In that panel, we saw Haradin, Gerd, and Goldberg, all of whom are members of the new Giant Warrior Pirates, who are one of the 7 key factions of the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. And Goldberg in particular also has this like really fun living shield with a face and a big old tongue thing, very Vegapunk-esque. But with this, we are definitely going to Elbaf, right? Like this is 100% confirmed now, surely. Before, I do think it was a bit up in the air, as if Elbaf was a bit of an optional arc, maybe just somewhere that Usopp visits after the journey, but I really don't see any way around it now. This island has just become far too important. In fact, what we could be doing right now is even setting up an Elbaf saga, or Egghead Island could even end up being being the first part of the Elbaf saga, because Robin's got to get to that island to read all of the books, and Usopp needs to go to Elbaf to complete his giant focused arc, and the fact that some of our Grand Fleet members are island natives just makes everything too perfect. Then there's also the ongoing meta threads with like Lola and Loki and Big Mom. Chuck a road poneglyph in there and it's a done deal. This flashback also did a lot to service the Revolutionary Army, because we can now pinpoint the exact moment where Dragon hit the accelerator on his drive to change the world. And in general, it's just really cool to know that he, Ivankov, and Kuma were the founding members. Although what's even better is that after that, there was this mind-melting panel of the crew, because this information piqued all of their interests in different ways. Nami was interested in Dragon. Usopp was like, Elbaf, I want to go to there. Then Frankie went, Kuma, my man, the ship guy. And Sanji was all like, Ivankov, right? So it was such a crazy panel because it was this crossover of 4 completely separate storylines. I'm not surprised that Sanji doesn't really know much about Ivankov's history, because even if Ivankov did feel like divulging such juicy information, Sanji almost certainly would not have wanted to listen. What surprises me a bit more is that Robin doesn't know any of this yet. Theoretically, Dragon knows that Saul and the Giant saved the books and took the books to Elbaf, and Robin of course spent 2 years within Dragon's army, so I guess my question is, why is any of this actually news to her? I feel like that's one of the first things you'd tell Robin if you were Dragon. Well, that and, hey, I'm your captain's daddy. Things are all becoming very clear though. Now that we know all of this, we've removed a lot of questions surrounding Kuma, specifically why and how he decided to protect the Sunny. He did it because of Dragon's son, and Vegapunk obliged because he is a longtime friend of Dragon. I mean, friend might be a bit of a strong word, but maybe solid colleague guy that he liked more than other guys. But this chapter pretty much solidifies Vegapunk as a good dude. The shroud of evil question marks is all but removed, with Vegapunk believing that there are a lot of great people within the world government, and that being a better mechanism for Vegapunk personally to have an impact on the world. Essentially, what we have with Vegapunk and Dragon are the 2 opposing philosophies of change. Dragon's path is change from the outside, meanwhile Vegapunk's path is change from within. I guess from within should be more like that instead of that, but I've done it now. Although I'm still curious about the Mads days with Queen and Judge, but I guess that's kind of looking like the science equivalent of the Rocks Pirates. You know, like how Whitebeard was a good-hearted guy man in amongst a crew of morally ambiguous bunglenuts. However, at the end of this chapter, Vegapunk's persona is definitely a lot different from what we see of him in the flashback. Modern Vegapunk seems a lot more dazed and aloof compared to his more composed and focused version of the past. It very much gives me the feeling of a cool retired grandfather just playing with the grandkids. Sort of like he lopped off his big brain, gave responsibility to the other 6 Vegapunks, and now the core Vegapunk is just enjoying his retirement, playing in the junkyard. One thing that goes a bit under the radar here is the impending conversation between Vegapunk and Bonnie. It was quite cute to hear Vegapunk doing the whole, oh, you've grown so much since you were not that big, and all of that, but we've got some serious business to settle here, which I imagine may lead us straight into the tragic tale of Bartholomew Kuma, as well as any number of other things, because that is the thing amongst things about Vegapunk. He is the man with almost all of the answers. He could shed light on Dragon, he could explain devil fruits, he could explain Kuma, he could even unveil what was written in those thousands of books on Ohara. What we could learn from the world's smartest man is limitless. This story could go in any direction with any number of revelations, and all of it sits on the tip of the tongue that is this tongue. It's very big, and I cannot wait to see what gets thrown at us next. This arc is seriously ramping up. Pretty much as soon as it started, we seem to be getting straight down to all of the businesses. Devil Fruit revelations, a Cypher Pole attack, a potential new Straw Hat, and a 900-year-old future robot from the past, as well as a modern robot from the modern. Ever since the end of Wano, Oda has not taken his foot off that narrative accelerator. So strap your you in, because we have got a lot to cover. So we essentially have a lot of Vegapunk lore dumping happening here, which is exactly what we, or at least I, wanted. And the big thing here is the unexpected revelation of Vegapunk's Devil Fruit. The brain fruit, which does admittedly sound much funnier in Japanese. It's a tongue twister, the nomi nomi no mi, which is why Vegapunk gets caught in his massive tongue. And I just want to point out that Oda has almost certainly just been patiently sitting on this pun for over 2 decades now. Conceptually, I actually like this fruit quite a lot because it comes with a sense of balance. Because sure, this gives your mind brain the capacity for infinite knowledges, but it is somewhat finite because each new fact leaves you a slightly bigger noggin to carry around wherever you so happen to go, and thus it gives you a literal burden of knowledge. It's like something out of a Stephen King book. Like if this were not a wacky pirate comic, then you could take this into some very sort of directions in the ironic horror genre. Probably my favorite part of this chapter was our weekly dose of Luffy logic, with the idea that since Vegapunk doesn't have his his brain on anymore. He might be just as or even potentially stupider than your average monkey-type pirate. And honestly, that is a thought I had with the last chapter, because Junkyard Vegapunk is just much more aloof than Flashback Vegapunk, and perhaps the slicing offing of one of the body's most vital organs might have had something to do with that. I'm also very intrigued by the idea that the 6 Punksome clones each connect to Punk Records once a day to take in all of the juicy knowledges, and I guess that's what very much keeps them all on the same page, which is why I wonder what would happen if they were suddenly cut off from Punk Records entirely, which may happen because bad things are almost certainly going to happen, if not happening, present tense. But if everyone gets cut off from the system, then I imagine that they would actually go on to become fully realized individuals. Punk Records right now is their great equalizer, but without that, they're not sharing their knowledge or potentially even their needs, and so they would each have to tackle life much more individually. We also have something of a maybe dream to fulfill here. Vegapunk is very keen on this insanely utopian idea of giving every living person access to Punk Records, and Jinbei, quite rightly in my opinion, points out that that's probably just gonna be a bad idea. To which Vegapunk essentially says, yeah, but like, science, my friend, science. Again, I do need to remember that this is One Piece, and an idea like this could work as the endpoint of the series, but all I really know is that this would never work in reality, unless we wanted to speed run our way to global destruction. What's even more concerning is that Vegapunk wants the whole world to contribute to it as well, like some sort of fictional pirate Wikipedia, but that sort of thing would surely require some insane moderation. Otherwise, science turns into, well, whatever the opposite of science is. It turns into lies, and probably mostly memes. But then again, there's definitely an issue with monopolizing information as well, and that might be part of what caused the whole war situation with the Great Kingdom. After about a gazillion years, we also know for a fact why Momonosuke's devil fruit was labeled as defective, and it's exactly the answer I wanted and have put forward on this channel on several occasions. But keeping in mind that Oda is, well, he's Oda, I can definitely see a situation where we meet Vegapunk and he's just like, oh yeah, it wasn't perfect because it was pink. No, I don't like pink. It functions identically, but just think of the aesthetic qualities. Oh, it's just so One Piece. And I love how harshly Vegapunk takes this failure. Like, this dude has, for all intents and purposes, perfectly replicated a devil fruit and just decided, blah, throw it in the bin because it's pink. Pink. Don't like pink. Should have been blue. I like blue. And at this point, I legitimately wonder if Vegapunk considers any of his inventions successful, because he refers to a couple of failures in this chapter, and I could see a comedically twisted world where Vegapunk has never once been satisfied with anything he's done and considers himself the height of failure, and all of them for very comical and mostly irrelevant reasons. The other example in the chapter is of course the beam saber. It serves its distinctly unique and not at all reference to something else purpose very, very well, but it also summons insects, which was a fun bit of comedy in the chapter, but I do wonder if this is setting something up in a narratively stealthy way. Like if there was a situation where, some insects would be mighty useful right now, and then someone like Usopp switches on the beam saber and pretends he's going to fight Lucci, but instead he's just summoning an army of bugs as a distraction. Or maybe Stussy or Kaku have similar fears of insects like Bonnie does. I don't know, I'm probably just reading into that too much. That's the problem with a series when the author is beyond masterful with setup. You start looking into every small thing as a potential setup for something else. But now, how about Vegapunk for Straw Hat? This got sprung on us very suddenly, but our Dr. Man has requested passage away from Egghead Island, which I imagine wouldn't just involve him, but also the other 6 punklets. And I'm actually quite excited by that potential, because I think it would create some really fun crew dynamics. Like say Sanji cooking 24/7 for York because she needs food and Sanji needs to simp, or even stuff like a trigger-happy Atlas starting a fight with Zoro. I imagine that the Seraphim would need to be abandoned, because otherwise I think the Straw Hats just automatically become the most powerful pirate crew in the world. So, we've got to leave something for the world government to actually be threatening with. After which point, though, we have a couple of options going forward. I imagine it could be in Vegapunk's best interest to reunite with the Revolutionary Army, because that's where bestest buddy Dragon is, but also Kuma. And maybe Vegapunk could do him a bit of a fix. Not to mention that Bonnie thread that we need to wrap up. The problem with that is that Momoiro Island isn't in the New World. It's all the way back in the first half of the Grand Line, and we don't go back, we need to push forwards. Only forwards. The revolutionaries would need to come to us. And so I still think Elbaf is looking like a good solution, especially if we get forcibly cut off from Punk Records, because all of the wonderful books should be with the Giants, and Vegapunk does seem to have some clout with the island. I don't know though. I have this awful feeling that the original Vegapunk may end up dying and we'll take on board the 6 Vega clones, sort of like seeing their flashback take place in real time. Inherited will and all of that. Speaking of though, I love Lucci, Kaku, and Stussy, but I still find it very difficult to see them as a threatening force. At least not in the same way that I saw, say, Jack during Zoro. Especially not in the masks. Kaku looks like some sort of Cthulhu creature. Meanwhile, Stussy just looks like she's on her way to a furry convention. Hattori legitimately looks so much more serious business than either of them. The thing to remember about CP0 though, is that yeah, they're outgunned by the Straw Hats, the Vegapunk, and all of the Seraphim. I really don't care how much progress Lucci and Kaku have made post-time skip. They are now fighting against a god, a king of hell, and still Sanji, so they do not win head on. But then again, that's not really how assassins best operate. Right now, they're knocking on the front door, sure, but the skills of Cypher Pol are best applied in the shadows. They can outthink and out-strategize the Straw Hats. And very importantly, they don't need to actually beat the crew to complete their mission. They just need to kill some Vegapunks. In fact, I dare say that every time Cypher Pol has decided to take a head-on confrontation, it's led to grand devastation. So they should really stick to what they do best, which is sneaky mask-wearing shenaniganry. Assuming they did go with the straightforward way, I guess CP0 are on track to hit Zoro and Brook, which would be fantastic because Zoro and Kaku could have some banter. Zoro being all like, so you decided not to get a job at the zoo after all. The poor life choices. Or something like that. I don't know, I'm not a sassy swordsman. All I know is that Brook would probably ask to see Stussy's panties. But what I took away from the end of any slobby is that Kaku did develop a begrudging respect for Zoro after their fight, so I would be very interested to see how he reacts more so than Zoro's side. Oh, and I just realized we completely skipped over the phenomenal ancient robot attack. That panel of it above Marijois, very Attack on Titan. But this here bad boy 200 years ago all of a sudden decided to scale the red line for, checks notes, reasons, but I don't think it came to life out of nowhere, as if it were programmed by the ancient kingdom to activate in 700 years. That seems weirdly specific. Feels more likely that someone else stumbled upon it, and then either accidentally or even intentionally woke it up. After which point, Robot did what Robot does, which is whatever Robot is told to do, which in this case was go to Marijois. Robin then mentions that 200 years ago also happened to be the time when Fishman rights came into effect, to which everyone promptly ignores her, because it's a completely out of nowhere thing to say. I mean, for example, 200 years ago was also the year that the St. Brice set sail, which is the ship that the Straw Hats encountered falling from the sky at the beginning of the Gyre arc. Basically though, this is much less Robin speaking and more Oda speaking to us here. He's saying, remember this thing because they might be connected. Fun fact though, what Robin didn't say is that 200 years ago was the first time the Ryugu Kingdom participated in the Reverie. The first of this many times. So roughly once a century. Perhaps our robo-friend even attacked Marijois during the Reverie, either terrifying the Fishman royalty at the time and prompting them to decide, hey, maybe we shouldn't do that again, or even causing the other kingdoms to think that the Ryugu Kingdom was responsible for the attack. Actually, you know what? I don't really like using the word attack, because the robot didn't actually cause any harm, presumably because it ran out of power, but also perhaps because harm wasn't necessarily what it was programmed to do. It could have been on a retrieval mission, for example, perhaps to take back a certain giant straw hat or any other relevant relics. In any case, what are the odds that Frankie finds a way to power it? It's not on the Frankie bingo card, but this mysterious power source is, well, it's far too good to ignore. Or maybe it's something even weirder. Like maybe it's a Haki robot powered by Haki. Except that no Haki user was stupid enough to try it, except for that one guy 200 years ago. Like, it's pretty ridiculous, and as it's coming out of my mouth, I kind of hope it doesn't happen. But I could imagine a situation where Luffy tries to use his word commands, but just gets a little bit too assertive, leaks some Haki, and it actually comes to life. The really cool thing though is that what happened 200 years ago with the robot kind of parallels what's happening in this very chapter with Kuma. He's activated out of nowhere and running to an unknown destination to enact an unknown act. It was kind of weird to see Kuma with all of his insides now being his outsides, because Lindbergh was tinkering with him in the hopes of, well, I don't actually know. This whole situation feels pretty hopeless. Then again, maybe that's why Dragon was speaking with Vegapunk, using him as some sort of glorified tech support to try and help out this Kuma situation. Very notably, Dragon and Ivankov still seem to treat Kuma like he's a living person. So they've definitely not lost hope that he's still in there. And I think that's saying something. That's saying the big something. Especially with Dragon, who is one of the more cynical realists in the world. If even he thinks there's hope, then I guess I should think there's hope. And also you. The way the scenes are juxtaposed seem to imply that Shaka's order to prepare for fight battling immediately triggered Kuma, as if he's part of the Vegapunk system, which I suppose he could be as a pacifista maybe. And theoretically, Kuma could would reach Egghead Island. If he still has his devil fruit, it is definitely possible, although it still probably wouldn't be instantaneous. Luffy, for example, needed 3 days to fly from Sapodi to Amazon Lily. But we are racing towards a potential Egghead conclusion far quicker than I thought we would. Many elements are coming together, and now we have a great sense of urgency. And while I definitely don't think we'll be off the island by the end of the year because there's only 3 chapters left, I do think that early 2023 is going to see the start of our next new journey. The moment has finally arrived. An unsuspecting rubber boy has officially made eye contact with this fearsome pigeon leopard, and thus punch fighting is imminent. I feel like I'm back in 2006, because that was the last time in my life that I was seriously anticipating a fight between Luffy and Rob Lucci. To start things off, I gave CP0 a lot of credit with the last chapter, perhaps even too much credit, because I said that their greatest skills are in being sneaky assassins rather than head-on assaulters. So even though they're completely outgunned, they can still definitely do some damage. But then, what do they do here? Immediately launch into a head-on assault. I feel like this world just has a different definition of the word assassin. However, one moment that gave me some serious chills was Rob Lucci ordering the abandoned ship. I love how quickly he was able to assess the situation, as well as the sheer commitment to his mission here. It reminds me of the start of the raid on Onigashima, the way that Kinemon and the other samurai sank their ships after landing. Because it's either we succeed and we're fine, or we fail, in which case the ships will be pointless anyway. So a really cool maneuver by Pigeon Brother. But this whole thing is almost like a reverse Enies Lobby. CP0 blindly invading an island currently housing the Straw Hats, although I suppose to be fair it's not blind because Stussy does seem to remember quite a bit about the island itself. Not that Lucci or Kaku, or anyone but Stussy knew that. Stussy saved all of that information until it was far too late to be particularly useful. But also Stussy recognized Atlas, which was kind of surprising. Because it means that the punk clones are much older than I thought they were, because Stussy seems to imply that the last time she was on Egghead Island was quite a long time ago. And speaking of Atlas, Lucci had not a modicum of chill when it came to her. He just snapped into chonk leopard form and devastated her with his ultimate attack, or at the very least what we know of as his ultimate attack. I mean, he probably has something even more ultimate-er now. That's what I really appreciate about Lucci as an antagonist though. He is a no-nonsense murder machine, a very efficient man who prefers to skip the effing around and go straight into the finding out. Even then, my CP0 highlight of the chapter was definitely Kaku. And look, I'm quite biased here because Kaku was always my favorite member of CP9. I just love that one of the most serious professional assassin dudes was transformed into a giraffe. Quite possibly nature's least subtle and most gentle of creatures. Apart from when they kick, because they can like behead lions and stuff. And come to think of it, maybe that's why Kaku is a kick specialist with the Rokushiki. But Kaku seems to have really come out of his giraffe shell in the past 2 years, because he seems to have an almost completely different personality. Watching him explore all of the crazy crap on Egghead was nothing short of delightful. And it makes me think that, under the right circumstances, Kaku would probably get along quite well with Luffy, Chopper, and Usopp, potentially even Frankie. In general though, this is just a really fun cipher pulsar. CP0 so far have mostly been these like silent, stoic, and very humorless existence. But this trio of Lucci, Kaku, and Stussy are a really good concoction for comedy. And as such, this trio have placed themselves in a rather hilarious situation. They've invaded an island, abandoned their only method of retreat, and immediately crossed paths with a member of the worst generation, an ex-warlord of the sea, and a current emperor of the sea. If this wasn't a manga, this is where the Curb Your Enthusiasm music would start playing. And maybe, just maybe, a cat, a giraffe, and a woman heavily implied to be the head of an underground prostitution empire aren't quite fully equipped to handle what this island has cooked up for them. And as a man who can barely handle any kind of spice in cooking, I empathize deeply with their predicament. In fact, in a weird way, I almost find myself rooting for Lucci because he's now the underdog of the situation. Like, instead of thinking, oh no, how's Luffy gonna get out of this one? I'm thinking, oh no, how is Lucci gonna turn this around? Because forget Luffy for a second, we also have Jinbei here, who has very recently defeated a more powerful, much larger, and almost certainly more racist cat in Who's Who. So even if we discount the Sun God, there is still a very solid match to be had here. Actually, I wonder if Jinbei's gonna bring up Who's Who. I'm not entirely sure why he would, but there is this weird triangle thing happening now, where Lucci knew Who's Who, Jinbei fought Who's Who, and now Jinbei is meeting Lucci who knew Who's Who. Triangle. Lucci's reaction to this is actually quite difficult to read though. He does have the serious business Oda under eye shading, so I suspect he's definitely feeling some of the old Luffy cravings right now, which I imagine to be like chewing on the fat of a steak, very rubbery and kind of annoying. Don't like the fat. But what we have here is a fairly unprecedented situation, because Luffy has met a ton of former antagonists before, but they don't generally want to fight him again because Luffy has broken and shattered their fragile villainous spirits. To be oddly fair in this case, one exception to this was Gecko Moria, who was still more than willing to pull his gothic vampire pants down bend over and get spanked by Luffy a second time during the Paramount War. Then again, I suppose Moria's spirit was broken long before he met Luffy, so I suppose there was no real damage left to do. I definitely get the impression that Lucci wants to fight, which isn't a surprise because his entire character can be basically summed up as, if it bleeds, I can, will, and have in fact already killed it while saying the sentence. But even then, I don't know if he will fight, primarily because killing Luffy isn't part of his current mission. But then again, Luffy probably isn't just going to stand there and let CP0 kill the Vegapunks, probably. I mean, he's no hero, but at least one of them does have a very funny head, so battle punching seems inevitable. One of the most interesting aspects of the chapter for me, though, is the mention of Sentomaru, who also happens to be a factor that could very much swing a much-needed pendulum of power back into the favor of CP0. He gets a very weird mention in this chapter, because Shaka orders command to the Seraphim to Sentomaru, implying that yes, he is indeed on the island, and doing a very bad job of guarding the bodies of Dr. Vegapunk, by the way, given that each and every Vegapunk have now encountered a potential pirate invader. But the way he's shown in this chapter is in this very heavily grey-toned panel, which generally in this series denotes a memory or mental image. Like, is this Shaka thinking of Sentomaru, rather than this is Sentomaru literally right here, right now? And the same thing happens with Atlas as well, which, again, it was weird. But if you don't remember much about Sentomaru, I don't blame you, because there was never really much to know. Essentially, he is the bodyguard of Dr. Vegapunk, and allegedly possesses the strongest use of defensive armamentaki in the world, which would paint him initially as quite a Vegapunk loyalist, but Sentomaru does also have connections elsewhere, specifically to Kizaru, who he refers to as Ojiki, meaning uncle in a very Yakuza and not at all blood relative kind of way. Also, post-time skip, Sentomaru is a fully fledged Marine officer, so I wouldn't be too quick to count him as one of our allies here. And if he flips, then now he also takes 3 of the Seraphim with him. And if that were to happen, then I think the Straw Hats would have a legitimate cause to run. However, I have to say that Luffy vs Sentomaru is a rematch that I would be far more keen for than Luffy vs Lucci, because the last time Luffy fought against Rotund Sasuke, he had no chance whatsoever. So I'd love to see just how far Luffy has come in that regard, and maybe his advanced Haki shenaniganry could now actually penetrate the world's greatest defense. Also, just a small thing, during this whole section there's a group shot of the Straw Hats with the Vegapunks, and Sanji is doing this like adorable protection pose against Robin in the background, and there's nothing really deeper to say about that. I just really like that subtle character moment. It's what makes One Piece worth really taking your time to read, or at the very least going back to reread the chapter after the initial hype has died down. The biggest news of this chapter, however, is not something said, but something shown, because we now have confirmation that both the original Kuma and the Seraph Kuma are using the same Devil Fruit ability. This is the first time in One Piece that we have had 2 confirmed concurrent users of the same Devil Fruit, and I mean this with no exaggeration, but this changes everything. Vegapunk is confirmed to now have the ability to either make copies of Paramecia Devil Fruits in addition to Zoan Fruits, or he has the ability to alter a being's lineage factor with the exact code required to replicate the fruit powers in question. Either way, this leads us into a brand new era, because in theory, there is now no such thing as a unique Devil Fruit anymore. So long as Vegapunk can study the fruit user's lineage factor, that power can then be duplicated. This is very good news for Senor Pink though, because it significantly reduces the chances that he had to die, so that his Swim fruit could be given to a cyborg fish. The other exciting thing is that Kuma is definitely coming to Egghead Island now, right? Which means that I think we're in for some very heartbreaking Bonnie story happening quite soon. And maybe Kuma will end up saving the Straw Hats and Bonnie one last time by just like booping the Sunny off the island before potentially sacrificing his rather large and bearsome self. But there is also the question of whether or not Kuma is still alive, considering he does still have his Devil Fruit powers. Theoretically, if he did die and was completely like cyborganized, then the powers would disappear and go elsewhere into another fruit. But then again, maybe the slow conversion into cyborg tricked the magical fruit powers into thinking that Kuma was still alive. I honestly don't know which one I'd prefer. If there was still a sliver of Kuma in there to make one last stand, or if there was a final legacy programmed into Kuma to do the same thing. But also, Mr. Dr. Vegapunk has a rather extreme dream of free infinite energy for the entire world, which in turn leads to Egghead Island becoming Ohara all over again, because Vegapunk has been a very naughty old apple man, and has been investigating taboo ancient energy sources. And all of that, look, it's nice and all, but Luffy's reaction was the absolute highlight of the chapter for me. He semi-politely listens to the old man's ambitions and dreams and basically says, "That's cool and all, but I don't care, because I've got pirate stuff to do." And I just love Luffy's purity of being. Like, not pure in the sense of good and innocent and all of that, but more in the unapologetic "this is what I am" sense. And the whole not wanting to be a hero is perfectly understandable with the fairly recent focus on freedom, because being a hero comes with a ton of responsibility. I mean, they're expected to do like good things to benefit the societies, and man, that sounds like
an awful lot of responsibility and not at all being free. It even makes me think back on stuff like the Grand Fleet. Luffy's official rejection statement was, "It'll cramp my style." But going deeper, becoming their leader would have meant responsibility. And responsibility is pretty much the antithesis of freedom. All of this is very much pointing towards some sort of utopian ending for One Piece though, as in there will come a day when the world government has been beaten, the entire world has free unlimited energy so no more wars, all disease has been cured by a reindeer, and the Red Line has been torn down, thus uniting everyone to live happily ever and after the end. All of which will be incidentally caused by Luffy pursuing his own selfish dream. But the Egghead Island arc seems to be ramping up to a conclusion pretty rapidly, and I think it's a shame that we haven't had more adventure time on the island, because this is quite possibly the most fun and exciting location we've ever been to. And something very subtle is that this chapter had a lot of interaction from the residents of Egghead Island, who up until now have been completely kept in the shadows. So who are these people? Are these people even people? They could be cyborgs or holograms maybe, and whatever they happen to be, are we just going to abandon them all? Because introducing a whole society does add complications, because now we can't just run. We've probably got to do something to save or safeguard Egghead Island and its citizens before leaving. And actually, something I haven't thought of is that Kuma very much has the answer to everything. His powers are how CP0 got on the island, and if OG Kuma is on his way, then his powers could also be how we rid them from the island without needing to get into an extensive drawn-out fight. Because the more I think about it, the more I keep landing on the fact that Luffy literally used Kaido as a jump rope. So I really don't know if a combative situation is really the way that Lucci quite wants to take this. Sun God versus Cat God? Unexpected, but this entire situation can only be described as Plus we have new Devil Fruit lore, old characters doing new things, and one hell of a big, bright, problematic Marine Admiral incoming. It feels like we've skipped the whole middle section of Astoria. Like we've gone from the fun, light introduction straight into the chaotic, wild climax. And I loved everything about this chapter right from the get-go, especially with Luffy's whole, "Hey, pigeon guy, what are you doing here?" And then Lucci just correcting him. "Actually, Straw Hat, what are you doing here? This is a government island, you see. I belong here. You don't." And Luffy's just like, "Fair point." And then fight battling ensues, well, after a bit of administration. A very small thing I loved about the chapter was the discussion surrounding Luffy's emperor status and how that has essentially given him a form of diplomatic immunity. Like he can just rock up to Egghead Island or assumedly any government island, and the world government can't really do much until they receive permission from the 5 geriatrics. It's a pretty groundbreaking moment for One Piece, because up until this point, Luffy has been the undisputed underdog, the sort of pirate-shaped scum that the world government is desperately trying to clean off their boots. But now we're at the point where it's like, ooh, look, if I punch that rubber man, then that's like the fictional pirate equivalent of shooting Archduke Ferdinand. And even Kaku interjects and is all like, "Wait, Lucci, according to page 1, paragraph 1, line 1 of the Don't F with an Emperor Without Permission Act, we're not supposed to F with the Emperor without permission." It's a very concise piece of legislation, one which Rob Lucci has chosen to ignore and may have accidentally started a war on purpose. To be completely fair to Lucci, look, I do seem to recall that Luffy had already declared war on the world government during any slobby, which Lucci was there to witness. Although in this case, if news of this event spread, then it could activate the Grand Fleet and maybe some of the Straw Hat supporting nations like Wano and the other ones that aren't Wano. So interestingly, we now live in a world where Luffy is freer than ever before, and his opponents are significantly more restricted, thus giving Luffy even more freedom by direct comparison. And just thinking about all this takes me back to Marineford. I mean, the permission, the bureaucracy, and the paperwork required simply to declare war on Whitebeard must have been a massive headache. Just like risk assessments for days. When it comes down to it though, this fight began for the most Luffy reason possible, which is that Atlas gave him food, which is the same reason previously used to topple Doflamingo and Kaido. Rebecca gave him food, as did Tama. So essentially, if you feed Luffy, then you have a whole emperor at your disposal. But now we need to talk about awakened Rob Lucci, because holy crap, he is amazing. I definitely wasn't expecting such a sleek and slender form, given the Zoan awakenings that we've seen in the past. But it looks like Lucci is following the model of Luffy's Zoan awakening, which is actually touched on by Shaka, mentioning that awakened Zoans generally lose themselves in all of the animalness, and so I suppose result in the type that we're more familiar with, such as the Impel Down Jailer Beasts. So maybe the Jailer Beast was sort of like an incomplete awakening, and the true form of an awakened Zoan is what Luffy and Lucci have managed to achieve, which give you like the funky god cloud draping effect. I should say that Yamato also has that effect, but it's hard to tell if that's because of an awakening or because that fruit is already a mythical guardian deity. Whatever the case, I love what is happening with Lucci here, because because he has very successfully stood up to the hurdle of you are a pre-time skip antagonist and now Luffy is a literal god. I say stood up, he hasn't quite overcome the hurdle yet, mostly because it's hard to tell just how seriously Luffy is taking this fight. I feel like no matter who the opponent is, Luffy would have more or less the same attitude in Gear 5th regardless. Always smiling and messing around. You could be Kaido or you could be Don Krieg, you're probably still going to get the same Gear 5th Luffy treatment. But Lucci is doing undeniably well right now, and I know exactly what he's thinking during this fight. Get this, he's thinking, mate, that Kaido guy probably wasn't so tough after all. Perhaps I, Rob Lucci, am indeed now the strongest creature in the world. And I have to congratulate Lucci on being the only antagonist so far to take a very serious L from our Rubber D, but still have the resolve to go away, get stronger, and come back for a rematch with no spirit broken whatsoever. In a way, this might make Lucci Luffy's toughest opponent, because he's the only one who hasn't had his will broken. But it makes a lot of sense that Lucci is still the same old murder cat, because of the whole a leopard can never change its spots thing. However, what we have learned is that a leopard can change the outfits of its pet pigeon, so I suppose that's something for the scientific community to mull on. My favorite panel of the chapter was definitely like the punch clash between Luffy and Lucci, because that hit me right in the nutsack of nostalgia. This panel was a direct callback to their fight in chapter 409 during Enies Lobby, and it's one of those images that has been seared into my mind for the past, well, far too many years. It makes me feel just like that iCarly meme. That's me. I am Miranda Cosgrove. But every Gear 5th panel was a complete treat for the eyes. Just getting to see pure Luffy fight in any way that he wants, I don't think it'll ever get old for me. And he, by which I guess I mean Oda, but Oda keeps coming up with all sorts of really fun, wacky techniques. Like the whole mole punch where Luffy plunged his fist into the ground, used his awakening abilities to rubberize it, and then hit Lucci with the rubber ground fist. That was so damn cool. I want more of that. This is also a really fun juxtaposition of personalities. Rob Lucci, who is quite seriously the most no-nonsense antagonist we've ever faced, versus a character whose entire power system is now based on nothing but nonsense. Like Lucci has a really funny reaction to the Gear 5th eye pop. He's just like, although something this does very casually confirm is that Luffy can enter Gear 5th at any time, which is very in keeping with the concept of Gear 5th given the whole maximum freedom angle. But I do wonder if this means that we are completely done with the days of ever seeing Gears 2nd through 4th, because why use them? Gear 5th is the most powerful one, but much more importantly for Luffy, it is by far the most fun one, and it doesn't seem to have any drawbacks so far, so I don't know why we would ever need to use any of the others. This chapter also delivers on something that I thought was a bit initially lacking on Onigashima, which are the Straw Hat reactions to Gear 5th, because a lot of them did see it, but we never really got to examine their thoughts on it. And it turns out that their thoughts are, look, when it comes to Luffy, we just don't question things anymore. Which was even funnier when Vegapunk asked how this transformation happened. And Nami just says, I don't know, which is the exact answer that we as readers currently have as well. Because basically the story goes, Luffy got smacked in the face by a fish, then became a cartoon. The end. At this point, I think the only Straw Hat that hasn't seen Gear 5th would be Zoro, who was unconscious the first time around and now having a delightsome tea party with the skeleton this time around. Which is a shame because as a confessed and recovering Zoro stan, I really want to see how he reacts to the even more insane than usual Luffy abilities. Vegapunk then drops a big old bombshell equating Luffy to the sun god Nika, before giving his own personal theory on devil fruit creation. And this is where we need to clear some things up. Being real here, I know that roughly 90% of people watching these videos read the scans. There's no shame in that. I'm not judging you. But the scans this week were particularly not great when it came to Vegapunk talking about the devil fruit origins. In fact, everyone I know who speaks Japanese was quite confused by the English translations that we used, which gives the impression that Vegapunk believes that devil fruits more or less magically sprouted into existence as a direct result of human desire. As if the fruits are subject to a similar phenomenon that all of Luffy's devil fruit powers are. If you can think it, then you can will it into existence. Which, according to Japanese speakers, isn't really accurate. For example, after speaking directly with Arta from the Library of Ohara, he clarified that it sounds more like Vegapunk is stating that the wishes of humans resulted in them pushing the limits of science to make those wishes come true, aka create the devil fruits. However, the exact creation process of said fruits is left unexplored. A bit like the Walt Disney quote, all of your dreams can come true if you have the courage to pursue them. But basically, don't take Vegapunk's words to mean that all devil fruits just popped into existence via raw desire alone. That desire, that wish, or that dream is what pushed someone to make that dream a reality. But we'll also probably go into this a bit deeper in the next video once I have the official wording. But as for now, Sentomaru is also here, finally. Apparently he was late because it's his day off. His initial appearance gives me some very strong retail vibes. Like, I can't believe I got called in for a shift today. And I also loved how Vegapunk guilt-tripped him into helping with the whole, "Look, Sentomaru, you can do whatever your own personal justice says. Don't worry about me, I'm just a defenseless old man who gave you food when you were starving, a job when you were not jobbing, a guarantor on your mortgage, I officiated your wedding, and I basically consider you to be my adopted son and I love you, but again, you just do what you think is right." Plus, Sentomaru's whole interaction with Luffy was delightful. Not at all how I was expecting this to go down, actually. Luffy was just so happy to see him. Like when you see a familiar face when you're really tipsy. Like, it's you, the guy I've met before. Isn't life wonderful? And I think it's really important remembering that Sentomaru was partially responsible for one of the most devastating moments of Luffy's life when the crew was split up on Sabaody. Something I was also very much not expecting was just how easily Sentomaru was injured and seemingly completely taken out of the fight by Lucci. Because Sentomaru's whole thing was that I have the strongest of the defenses in the world. So what the crap is this? Where was your defense? Because if you don't have that, then you're nothing. You're just a pile of man meat waiting to be fed to a cat. It is a bit too early to say that he's out for good, and I would actually be surprised if he is. However, Oda did draw Sentomaru with a knocked out wide eye effect, so at the very least Lucci did some serious damage here, which has now swung the whole Seraphim situation into the favor of CP0, because we did learn about their hierarchy of control. Up the top it goes the 5 Elder Stars, then the Vegapunks plural, then the Sentomaru singular, and then whoever has the funky control cube. And with this in mind, I guess I can see what CP0 were going for here. They obviously never intended to face a direct conflict against the Seraphim. The idea was more to just kill everyone above them in the control hierarchy and take default command. It adds a very interesting tactical element to this fight, because everyone who has priority over CP0 is also significantly weaker than them, and they need to be there in person to assume command, thus putting themselves in danger. But as of right now, I still think we have the key win condition, because we need just one Vegapunk with an escort of, say, 10 Straw Hats to turn the tide, or even just destroying the command device that CP0 have. The only thing that could really be a solid shot in the crotch would be if one of the 5 elders showed up on the island alongside the Marines, which we'll talk about in a bit. But knowing that the 5 elders are on top of the hierarchy says to me that that's going to be narratively relevant at some point. The Seraphim are almost certainly going to be antagonists moving forward. But we have yet to talk about by far the most exciting part of the chapter, which is the continuing story of Sakazuki's desk adventures. It's always good to see our fleet admiral taking on such an active role, stuck behind his desk of absolute chastity. Post-time skip Sakazuki really is just a meme. Every time we see him, he just becomes more and more like Magellan, just constipated with administration and never allowed to leave his seat. And always going, no, don't do that or that. In fact, look, can we all just stop doing things? Please. I do sympathize with his situation here, given that Rob Lucci has potentially started an entire war without permission and has cost the Marines their greatest weapon in Dr. Vegapunk, who is now aligning himself with an Emperor of the Sea. And then there's Kizaru. This is pretty big. As interesting as the Seraphim struggle with CP0 is, the impending arrival of Kizaru on Egghead Island is the big oh damn factor that we really needed. And he is the perfect admiral as well. He has a relationship with Sentomaru, he's the owner of the original powers that the Seraphim lasers are based on, and the Vegapunks just so happen to have developed certain devices that allow people to completely counter him by making light tangible. So yeah, Kizaru, he's on his way, but I don't know if we're going to be packing up and running away immediately. This may be our very first proper stand against an admiral, and we're going to be getting into all of that and more in the next video. One Piece has taken an unexpected yet delicious turn. This fight is pure joy, like taking your overly leveled character and replaying an early game boss. Plus Vegapunk is on the move, Kizaru is on the way, and Sentomaru is on the floor, as well as quite possibly the biggest reveal regarding devil fruits thus far in the series. But first things first, our boy is hungry. Luffy, when engaged in fight battling mode, has a bit of a tendency to become an absolute savage, attempting to solve his problems in the only way he really knows how, by consuming them for sustenance. And he just looks so menacing when he goes in for the chomp on Lucci. Like, this isn't just Luffy having fun. There's a slight hint in his expression of, yeah, I'm gonna eat ya. It's quite sinister. And I'm sure it's been pointed out elsewhere, but it gives me some very solid Gigantamax Gengar vibes. But what I love most about this is that this isn't actually an unexpected tactic from Luffy. In fact, he's tried to eat several of his opponents in the past. And it actually worked on one occasion where he ate his way through Charlotte Cracker, but of course this technique was pioneered in Luffy's initial match with Crocodile, the Gomu Gomu no Baku Baku, where he just took Crocodile's upper body right off. Fun fact though, a lot of people don't pick up on this, but this technique was directly inspired by Luffy's encounter with Walpole, and it's even named directly after his devil fruit, the Baku Baku no Mi. So Luffy saw how Walpole thought and was like, damn, this guy gets it. But the whole exchange between Luffy and Lucci was nothing short of spectacular. And the kind of crazy choreography on display reminds me of when you're playing with toys as a child. Oda in these fight scenes is very much enjoying himself every bit as much as Luffy is. And as an author, it must feel pretty damn good to reach a pinnacle in your story where you have complete freedom to make whatever you want happen and not break the world whilst doing so. Now, there were also some sneaky references in this fight, again calling us back to Enisobi. Specifically when we heard Lucci's monologue about how, oh no, I'm a cat and I'm losing consciousness. That is a very direct callback to chapter 422, right after Lucci became the victim of Luffy's biggest fisting to date with Gear 3rd. One small detail that you may have missed though is that it looks like Luffy is dominating 100% of this fight, but there is one section where Lucci appears to get the better of him. Although the reason why you may not notice is because it happened off screen. But we cut to a collision with a yelling noise and then all we see is a hole in the wall in the shape of Luffy's body, very Looney Tunes style. And what I love about that is you don't actually need to see what happened there. The story is perfectly conveyed by that one hilarious panel. However, as for a story I do think we did maybe need to see, let's talk a bit about Sentomaru. Because he starts and finishes this chapter in the exact same position, which is face down in a pool of liquid failure, which I imagine consists of blood and saliva and probably some urine. This is a very classic One Piece fanbase discussion, but in this case, I don't think I'm a fan of having him beaten off screen, because we leave him to do his sacrificial hero thing, and then just cut back to him in his favorite position on the floor. I'm fully prepared to admit that this may just be a me thing, but this is Sentomaru we're talking about. As much as he definitely hasn't been a major focus of the story, he was a pretty big deal pre-time skip. In fact, he was the roadblock that caused the Straw Hats to split up. And maybe if we'd had a bit more of him in other parts of the story, I'd be okay. But I was really hoping for more than just seeing him get thwacked in the tum-tum and effectively being removed from combat before he even began to participate in said combat. I mean, I suppose what it does go to serve is Lucci. The fact that he can, and look, I don't want to use the word penetrate because that's a bit sexual, but the fact that he can circumvent the world's greatest defense, that is a pretty big thing, and it catapults Luffy back into the sphere of mildly decent power. With that said, I think you could probably add this fight to those YouTube compilations of cats knocking stuff over on surfaces, because that is essentially what Luffy vs. Sentomaru amounted to. Now, the most interesting part about this chapter for me was listening to an old man talk about fruit, and for this alone, I would just like to take a moment to praise One Piece in general. A lot of shonen really struggle with exposition, especially from characters who don't, engage in the fight battling. But One Piece very consistently hypes me up more than anything to hear this wacky applehead go on at great length about completely fictional science. I would gladly sit in a lecture hall just listening to Vegapunk talk about the world. And in this case, what he breaks down is the entire world of artificial devil fruits. Zoan fruits can be pretty much perfectly replicated, I would say within 99.9% accuracy, accounting for that 0.1% error in color. Colors seem to be very difficult. In fact, the very concept of blue proved more challenging than constructing a mythical dragon that probably never existed. Vegapunk also implies that yes, we can engineer entire mythical zoans, but the resources required would be pretty extreme. In this panel, by the way, we get treated to a fruit collage where you can see Kaido's fruit, Yamato's fruit, and even the tip of Orochi's devil fruit. Just the tip for Orochi, although to his credit there, that is still further than he ever got with Komurasaki. Meanwhile, Paramecia fruit replication seems to work pretty much smack bang the way I've been proposing, whereby it's not possible to replicate the actual fruits themselves, but instead what happens is that Vegapunk analyzes the code of the user's lineage factor and then replicates that code through his own system of new blood that was invented specifically for this purpose. Just say that again. The dude invented his own blood. And my own personal headcanon for that right now is that the blood is only green because Vegapunk failed to replicate the color red. However, this led to a very touching moment with Frankie because my poor emotional cyborg genuinely thought that his best buddy Senor Pink had departed from this world before they got a chance to catch up and talk about women, or I guess woman specifically, but I really liked this. I mean, it's played for comic effect because it's Frankie, but I just love that he made a friend. The other Straw Hats form bonds all the time, especially Luffy, but Frankie's usually just sort of isolated in the background being weird. And and it makes me want to see a one-shot sequel special. Like, let's say after One Piece ends, we have a 50-page chapter featuring the adventures of Frankie and Senor Pink. And I'm incredibly glad that Mr. Hardboiled is confirmed to be alive, which I think is a more reliable method of extracting fruit abilities. Because sure, you could kill the users, but then you would have to be pretty damn sure what kind of fruit the ability is going to move into next, and if you mess up, then well, hell, you've just lost that power. So yeah, probably better to keep them in a state of perpetual torture whilst you give that power to a bioengineered shark. But something I've been most curious about are the Logia fruits, which as of right now are completely unable to be replicated. I mean, I say completely, Vegapunk clearly did with the lasers, but are mostly unable to be replicated, which is fascinating because that would imply that they manipulate a part of the body beyond changing the lineage factor. Because if it was just a different code, then surely you would just code the code. I mean, look, I am not a science, I'm sure it's more complicated than that, but when it comes to fictional science, no, it is not. So my conclusion is that the very nature of what a Logia power does to a consumer must be quite different. Meaning that the most evolutionary advanced human Adonis on this island is currently Caribou, because he is the only one whose power cannot be scientifically replicated. And good on him. But we also have big information regarding the Seraphim. S-Snake in this chapter actually speaks, which is huge, because it implies that these beings have personalities and wills of their own, which is something that we'd previously not necessarily had displayed. Although thinking about it, the Seraphim that we've encountered so far are definitely the less talkative half of the warlords. I mean, you've got Kuma, Jinbei, and Mihawk, the three kings of stoic silence. If you put all three of them in a room together, it would be quieter than a mime taking a shit in a cupboard. So it makes sense that their Seraphim don't speak unless absolutely necessary. But it does give us a lot of hope going forward, because sure, they might be easy to control as children, but in a series so focused on willpower, I can't imagine that these particular characters would remain so obedient. I mean, the 7 warlords contain some of the strongest personalities that this series has to offer. In fact, 2 of them even have Conqueror's Haki. They were born to rule, not that. And if their clones are anything close to their original personalities, then this is going to cause the world government big problems eventually. Back to fruit though, S-Snake is confirmed to have the Mera powers, which I think is going to cause alarm bells to go off for some people, because those powers with Boa Hancock are pretty directly correlated to lust and, the general wanting to doing of things to her. However, I think that this is what we've previously speculated, that the fruit takes advantage of the core feeling generated by the user, and in the case of S-Snake, that's probably more along the lines of innocent cuteness, which we do actually have some precedent for in the series. For example, on Dressrosa, Vice Admiral Suda Squad was put under a cuteness spell after encountering Mancherry, which wasn't weird at all until this woman made it weird with her tongue out, I suppose implying that she wants to eat Princess Mancherry. But everyone affected by the powers of S-Snake is probably going to be looked at pretty unfavorably by certain segments of our community, and all I can really hope is that Sanji never encounters S-Snake, because that boy is probably getting petrified and we would never hear the end of it. What I found more adorable than S-Snake was actually Esper using the miniature Ursa shock. It was devastatingly cute, like a tsunami with googly eyes. But more importantly, it shows the incredible threat that they represent. Because even as children, these Seraphim are all fighting at pretty much the top level, and completely without Haki either. So if they do reach adulthood, I could certainly see them being undisputedly the world's strongest living beings. Something I think is very underrated though is the last page of the chapter, or the last 2 pages I guess. It's very simple, but it's very effective the way that Oda breaks down all of the different factions. Almost like a recap of where everyone stands, quite literally. Which I appreciate because One Piece can often get very convoluted regarding who is where, who they're wearing with, and what they're doing and the where that they are. I mean, less so in arcs like Egghead and more so in arcs like Wano and Dressrosa. But still, I like that these 2 pages are just like straw hats here, other straw hats here, CP0 there, Marines somewhere over here. And just on that last part, Kizaru's dialogue was very ominous here, and it seems like he's preparing for a full-on proper assault, which he should be given that he is up against an emperor and his crew. It's very bold when you think about it. After all of that concern about, oh no, I accidentally lead a whole war, that is exactly what Kizaru is about to do. And my personal hope is that Egghead Island will be surrounded by marine ships. Surrounded by the point where there's nowhere to go but up into space. Because I've been going back and forth on this, but it really is starting to look like Egghead Island itself is unsalvageable. The Marines are going to claim it, take the Seraphim, achieve tactical dominance, and with the only X factor remaining being Bartholomew Kuma. Now, as much as I did enjoy this chapter, I will say that it didn't really do much that 1069 hadn't already done. And in the end, we're in pretty much the exact same narrative position as before. 1069 ended up with us resolving to take Vegapunk away, CP0 taking command of the Seraphim, Kizaru incoming and Sentomaru on the floor. Whereas chapter 1070 ended with us resolving to take Vegapunk away, CP0 taking command of the Seraphim, Kizaru incoming and Sentomaru on the
the floor. I guess I'd call it a sequel chapter. 1070 did everything 1069 did, but bigger, which isn't a bad thing. I still found it incredibly enjoyable, especially Luffy vs. Lucci, which was also something that 1069 did. I just find it very interesting how similar they are, to the point where all of the thumbnails I used for the last chapter would still be highly relevant to use for this one. However, one mega thing that 1070 did was actually first up on the cover page, finally revealing the full makeup of Mads and all of its weirdly nerdy and violence-some glory. And there is so much to dissect about this group, especially that mystery member there, who I suspect we've already met, and we're going to get into all of that in the next video. Garp versus Blackbeard. Definitely not the matchup I was expecting, but holy crap, I will take it. Especially since this is the first time, to my recollection, that Garp is actually doing something worthy of his hero title. Remembering that that's kind of a false accolade given to him after the whole God Valley censorship incident. And in fact, I even have a whole video asking the question of, is Garp actually a hero? But at this moment, the answer is yes, he is. It's indisputable. Garp is doing the typical third act opening of disobeying orders for the greater good and such, and is setting sail to potentially start a war with an Emperor of the Sea, all for the sake of one Kobe. If this was a movie, I feel like the scene that would have preceded this would have been the Fleet Admiral asking Garp to hand over his gun and his badge, because he's too much of a loose cannon, so he's off the force. But I feel like what truly makes this heroic is that this may very well be the last stand of Monkey D. Garp. I really do feel like just casually strolling into Blackbeard's stronghold, whilst wonderfully dramatic, is quite the poor maneuver and can only result in tragedy. Let's examine this for a bit. Blackbeard encountered Silver's Rayleigh on Amazon Lily. Rayleigh is of course best known as a drunk, womanizing, gambling, legendary old man, which means that Blackbeard has something of a trend happening when it comes to targeting the elderly, with Whitebeard, Rayleigh, and now Garp. Yeah, it's practically elder abuse. I mean, the Rayleigh situation went pretty badly, but that's because Blackbeard was the aggressor. He was invading someone else's stronghold. He was doing it without the support of his full crew, and there was a competing faction of Marines. In this situation, facing off against Rayleigh was just too much of a wildcard factor for Blackbeard to risk. However, with Rayleigh's words that he isn't particularly sure if he'd be able to win against Blackbeard in a life or death round of fight battling, then I think things would go down very differently if Rayleigh were in Garp's current position. If Rayleigh were to invade Hachinosu all by his old man self, then he would lose every single advantage that he had on Amazon Lily, which even then was very much up in the air. I mean, a big part of that was also the fear of letting Boa Hancock go free and being all petrified. And Garp, well, look, let's not deny this, he's very much past his prime. Something people often forget is that Blackbeard was more than prepared to fight both Garp and Sengoku at Marineford. Now, you could explain this in one of three ways. Either Blackbeard had an insane amount of arrogance, or perhaps absorbing 2 devil fruits resulted in a weird side effect of Blackbeard spawning the largest pair of balls known to this world, or most sinisterly, that by his calculations, Garp and Sengoku were well within his reach. I'm not inclined to say that, Blackbeard was just high on power and being a bit of a cheeky cockwaffle. And the joke I made about testicles is it's obviously a joke. So I think Blackbeard legitimately thought that he could take both Garp and Sengoku in his current state and of course with his aesthetically challenged disciples, which is making me very, very nervous for our Monkey D patriarch. If anything, speaking of Marineford, this is starting to look like a reverse of the thing it is that was, where an emperor attacked the world government in order to save one crew member, and now we have Garp attacking an emperor to save one subordinate. But the reason why I really like this move is because it looks like Garp has actually learned from that whole Ace situation. Garp's inaction at Marineford cost Ace the vast majority of his torso, which was unfortunately required for living, and I think that this time Garp is much less willing to just sit and watch things play out. Which is also cool because honestly, it's a very Luffy thing to do. To completely disregard politics and balance in favor of just, some punching and saving a dude. And also, Blackbeard right now needs something to put himself back on the map as a villain. What he's competing against is a literal sun god who just, for all intents and purposes, beat the 2 strongest living beings in the world. Blackbeard needs a thing like that to really stand up and become just as threatening as he is obese. And going up against Garp does exactly that. Because Garp is actually a pretty terrible opponent for Blackbeard on paper. Because Garp doesn't rely on fanciful fruit, and so a big part of Blackbeard's combat functionality suddenly has no function. To beat the Garp, Blackbeard can only overcome him with raw strength, which might not have to be his own individual strength. Just like with Whitebeard, it would probably come in the form of some sort of ghastly pirate gangbang, which I will defend as an
appropriate statement, because ultimately Whitebeard was killed by a gang of pirates all going bang, 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 bang with their gun things. But it's also very thematically appropriate. To most of the world, Garp represents hope. We as readers know that that hope is actually contained within Luffy, but to everyone else, Garp is the embodiment of safety and stability. So for him to fall may truly be the last barrier we need to break to start the incoming war. But on a much smaller scale, killing Luffy's grandfather also just isn't a very nice thing to do, and it would make the inevitable conflict with Blackbeard that much more meaningful. You killed my brother, you killed my grandfather, you're probably going to kill my mentor Shanks, and you want to take my dream of becoming the Pirate King? No. That's not happening. And to be honest, I am getting so much more excited for the sheer crap storm that's going to happen on Hachinosu than I am for anything to do with Egghead or Elbaf, because it feels like this is going to be a historical event. Something I'd like to note is that depending on how Law versus Blackbeard worked out, he may also be present on Hachinosu and be able to form a bit of a fun alliance with Garp and Kobe. I would love to see Law interacting with Garp and just continuously sighing at how similar he is to Luffy. But also, Helmeppo, mate, this right here is character development from pathetic sniveling snob to slightly less pathetic but still sniveling hero. What's important is the last part, the hero part. Helmeppo is unironically what makes One Piece great. The continuous growth of all of these tertiary characters that we've been experiencing over decades. And who knows, maybe this will legitimately lead to some sort of big moment for Helmeppo. I also wonder if this is what Oda was referring to with his Jump Festa message. In case you don't know, every year Oda pens a special message at Jump Festa to tease what's coming in the next year of manga. Sometimes these are outright spoilers, but most of the time they're just really vague statements. In either case, Oda's sense of timing usually turns out to be quite off, and these statements don't generally pay off until 2 or 3 years down the line. But for this year, Oda teased us by saying, that person and that person will fight. If I were to give it a title, I'd call it a battle royale. I hope no one dies, all of which is very much falling into place with the Hachinosu stuff. Blackbeard and Garp will fight, ? And also with all of the other forces, we could definitely get some sort of battle royale happening. And as for the death flag of Oda saying, oh, I hope no one dies, I think that Garp is a solid choice for the person that Oda is hoping not to die, but is probably still going to kill that monster. Which is also a really solid choice for Kobe, because he's still relatively early on in his hero's journey, and the death of a mentor is a very classic trope designed to really ignite and push our hero man to the next level. So along with Garp earning his hero title, what we may also see is Kobe well on the way to making his hero title a reality as well. And we haven't even begun to discuss the most interesting potential conflict, which is Kuzan, because we actually have 3 generations of Marines all converging on Hachinosu right now. Kuzan is actually something of a Garp fanboy as well, and he absolutely idolized Garp for continuously refusing promotions on the ground that he didn't want to become an instrument of the world nobles. So what we have happening here is 2 options. Either this is where Kuzan will flip and join Garp's forces, or there's the significantly more tragic option, which I am unfortunately leaning towards at this point. When it comes to Mr. Kuzan and his tale of mysterious justice, our current plot is about how the Blackbeard pirates don't necessarily trust him, which we learnt on Dressrosa when Jesus Burgess said, and I quote, I don't necessarily trust him. Blackbeard, of course, was of the opinion that, yeah, all of my crew are bungle nuts, so it doesn't really matter. So adding a former admiral didn't really piss in his pirate soup the same way it did for Burgess. But if there was one way for Kuzan to solidly gain the trust of everyone on Hachinosu, be it Jesus Burgess, this literal horse, or a strange 19th century prospector named Kikipatsu, who lives on Blackbeard's pleasure couch. Look, doesn't matter who it is. But a great way to gain their trust would be to kill the greatest Marine who has ever lived. The Marine that you, Iceman, have personally idolized and looked up to the most during your career. They'd all laugh. Blackbeard would do a bit of a or however his stupid laugh goes. But then you, Ice Guy, would officially be one of them. It's a bit tropey, but I bring it up because Kuzan clearly has some sort of grander plan by aligning himself with these filthy scallywags. A plan that would potentially be ruined through Garp's most unplanned assault on Pirate Paradise. I mean, when it comes down to it, Kuzan probably isn't the one who would make the decision. Much like Loose Teeth, it seems like something that would come more from the mouth of Blackbeard. Like a sort of, look, Kuzan, mate, my men have been talking and that talk has not been favorable in regards to your work ethic as a filthy scallywag. So you know what, let's consider this a bit of a performance review. All you need to do to pass is kindly kill your former boss in front of all of us, and don't you dare go pulling any Jaguar D Soul shenaniganry like you did last time. Although that's the one thing that definitely cannot happen. Oda cannot pull the time capsule move again. Not because Blackbeard would know, but because we as an audience would know, and that removes tension. Speaking of Soul though, what are the chances that he's the mysterious person hiding on Egghead Island who's about to do something sacrificial to potentially save Robin again? Let me know in the comments, but just hold that thought for a second because I am not done talking about this Blackbeardiness. Because this isn't just a couple of rogue marines disobeying orders we're talking about. We are talking about Garp the hero. And this could cause a massive schism within the entirety of the Marines, one that we've been anticipating since the very beginning of the series. At some stage, the good Marines like your Smokers and your Kobes are going to have to reckon with your bad Marines like your Sakazukis and your these guys. Onigumo, that's his name. Anyway, he's a dick. And remembering that Sakazuki himself does not have popular support of the Marines. In fact, it was stated that Kuzan was who the vast majority of Marines wanted to become the new fleet admiral. So what happens when someone more aligned with the popular justice goes rogue like Garp is about to do? Well, what it does is set a very bad or a very good example, depending on your perspective, for the other Marines to follow, which works out no matter what happens. If Garp is successful, then it proves that being a loose cannon of sloppy justice is the way to go, and more Marines in position of power may start taking matters into their own hands, becoming rather tired of following Sakazuki's desk adventures and never being able to do anything. And if Garp does die, then that would only make him a martyr. Essentially, he'd end up becoming even more of a hero in death than he was in life, and inspire Marines to pursue their own personal justices anyway. Although I think the more exciting prospect of that tragedy is the fact that the Marines would need a new spiritual leader. At the moment, that leader is Garp. He is the ultimate manifestation of justice, manliness, and fistliness that everyone looks up to. I mean, the world government wouldn't even let him retire because they were worried about what it would do for morale. So who fills that gap when Garp is gone? I mean, as a placeholder, Kuzan, not a terrible idea, except that he's currently a pirate and thus unavailable. But I think it's going to end up being Kobe. By the end of One Piece, I suspect that Kobe is going to be thought of as the Marine equivalent to Luffy's Pirate King. Two young individuals of the next generation leading the world to a new dawn. But I also love the idea that even though Luffy is his biological grandson, Kobe actually becomes the one to inherit the will of Garp. All of Garp's hopes and dreams for Luffy being realized in the next generation's hero of the Marines. Oda just confirmed not one but two massive and, dare I say, some of the most ridiculous fan theories at the same time as well. It's like killing two birds with one stone and then going on to clone the birds and reveal that the stone was in fact a Rox. Because Stussy is a clone, and not only that, but she is a clone of Buckingham Stussy, former member of the Rox Pirates. Also, Stussy is a literal demon, ? We have a hell of a lot to answer in this video, including one extra special question, which is who is Stussy actually working for? Because I think I know, and it makes me view her completely differently. But first, we've got to deconstruct this story lasagna that Oda has laid out for us. And at the bottom layer is the long-awaited confirmation that Miss Bakken was a member of the Rox Pirates, although that isn't her full name. Her full name is Buckingham Stussy. And in this case, the official translation was smack bang on the money, because Viz chose to translate her name as Buckin, which back in the day was met with a lot of, that's kind of weird, why you do that, Viz? But it was extremely accurate. No doubt a British monarchy reference to Buckingham, which my mother always pronounces as Buckingham, and my wife's family are all from England, so you can see this like visceral physical pain on their faces when my mother says Buckingham, because it's a soft ham, it's a Buckingham. And I know that the Americans watching are probably tempted to say Buckingham the same way that you guys all say Marineford instead of Marineford, but look, that's fine. You guys invented light bulbs, the printing press, and other things, I'm sure, so we'll let you off for now. I will say that Whitebeard's alleged intimate relations with Miss Bakken makes a lot more sense, because for want of a better term, she followed the evolutionary path of Big Mom, which I refer to as the Type 2 style of aging. In One Piece, women can only age in one of two ways. Type 1 aging is more accurately referred to as not aging at all, with prominent examples including Shaki. Meanwhile, Type 2 aging is when Oda's female characters rapidly, and I mean rapidly, decline over the years and take on the more Big Mom, Kokoro, and now Bakken style aesthetic. There's no in between, it's either one or the other. But I do fear that this makes the pre-existing Rox clone ideas much more viable. As soon as Rox was introduced as a silhouetted concept, there have been trains of thought alleging that either Dragon or Blackbeard could be some sort of clone of Rox, and from here the cloning theories are only going to spiral completely out of control until the end of the series. I mean, Dragon is 55 years old, so that makes that idea very unlikely, because he would have been born just a year after Queen and Judge. So he would have existed for for so many units of time before Mads formed. Blackbeard is much more youthful, yet much more rotund 40 years old, so it's a bit more viable in his case, especially considering all of the weirdness to do with his body. So perhaps Blackbeard is even one of the alluded to failed clones. Look, age is a pretty tricky thing with clones though, because Stussy is often hinted at being quite the old woman, but realistically, if she is a clone, then she's only existed for what, like 30 years? So my guess would be that she was brought into existence as an adult, unlike say the Seraphim who were born as children, as most of us are. I have to say though, this has thrown a major spanner in the already fragile works of my mind brain, because I'm now not even sure if Miss Barkin is the real Buckingham Stussy. That's just an assumption that that's just an assumption that me have jumped to. But it was very specifically stated that Stussy was the first successful clone, meaning that there are others. And perhaps Miss Barkin is a clone as well, but one that doesn't have Stussy's special anti-aging powers. Speaking of powers, look, this is a question I wasn't expecting to ask ever, but is Stussy a vampire? Because at the end of the chapter, she does a bit of a suck of those there giraffe bloods and grows wings, and unexpected is not a strong enough word to describe how this chapter left me. While we're on giraffes though, I want to point out a frankly ridiculous connection. Because in chapter 860, where Stussy is first introduced, she also drinks a giraffe, thanks to the powers of Charlotte's smoothie, describing the experience as tasty and smooth. Tell me that that isn't the wildest piece of foreshadowing that Oda has ever just jammed into their series. To be fair, I don't necessarily think that it was purposeful foreshadowing. I actually think that One Piece is such a long and packed full of stuff series that there is a principle that all events, no matter how obscure and unlikely, are at some stage going to happen twice, like this bizarre giraffe drinking moment. But I also like how Stussy does it in the chapter. It's a very delicate bite, a bit of a meow, like a skilled giraffe doctor making an incision, as opposed to like the blah, ravenous, hungry, stereotypical vampire bite. The concept of a vampire devil fruit is not new to One Piece, although it is new to canon One Piece, because in the game Unlimited World Red, the main antagonist was Patrick Redfield, who had a bat zoan that transformed him into a kind of vampire. I mean, he didn't suck the bloods, but he did suck your life force out of you. And this sort of thing is the potential explanation for how this Stussy has remained so young, just like siphoning off the delicious youth of all of those around her. More so than vampires, Stussy at the end of the chapter gives me solid succubus vibes, presenting herself as a very seductive demoness, and I think it's interesting in direct contrast to the Seraphim, which are presented as angels. There's some real heaven versus hell kind of aspects that are starting to develop in One Piece, and maybe this Stussy clone is the bait test for the Seraphim that went bad, both physically and morally. But this brings up questions, so many more questions. Like, the Stussy clone cannot have been given a devil fruit ability by Vegapunk because you need the green blood to do that in theory, to manipulate the lineage and the stuff, science to do the science. So Stussy is either a clone that went on to eat a devil fruit, or she's an amalgamation of a human with another race, like how the Seraphim are with the Lunarians. And the demon race is something that has been speculated to actually exist in One Piece, with the most prominent example being Charlotte Darquois. He has these very demony batty style wings that have never been explained and are not too dissimilar from what Stussy presents here. It also instantly draws my mind to Demonia, which if Stussy does continue to be an antagonist is something I need to see, Robin versus Stussy. But also, more clones. Again, the first successful clone implies that there are others, but it also implies that there were unsuccessful clones. Cut to Edward Weevil. This is your call to get on stage as a potential failed clone of Whitebeard, or depending on your perspective, perhaps he was the perfected form of Whitebeard. Given that Queen was involved, the whole philosophy of being too popular if one was thin may have played an unfortunate role in Edward Weevil's creation. Brief tangent, we see more of the Mads cover story, and I swear that Queen has already gained weight. He doesn't look anywhere near as lean as he did in the previous page, and I'm pretty sure that at this point, he's already began stuffing himself with tech like a cyborg Christmas turkey. But like, we have entered such a weird era of One Piece. In the span of 20 or so chapters, we've gone from fulfill the ancient prophecy on the feudal samurai land, all the way to everyone in this world is either a hyper-advanced clone or has a hyper-advanced clone of them. I really did not expect One Piece to ever have such a huge emphasis on cloning. To be fair, it was very well seeded through Judge on Whole Cake Island, and I really want to go back on that arc now, because both he and Stussy were present at the wedding. And that's got to be just a little bit awkward. When your lab clone shows
shows up at your biologically engineered son's wedding. And you know, going back on it, they are sitting at the exact same reception table in chapter 861. So I imagine that there was some awkward science-y tension happening there. But it's another one of those small things that makes Whole Cake Island so much more of a valuable arc in retrospect. Although it blows my mind just thinking about how well Mads has been set up in general. I've often said that the entire post-time skip era has been setting up Big Mom and Kaido. And that's true, but it goes so far beyond that because it's been building up Mads. Punk Hazard and Dressrosa gave us the story of Caesar Clown and the artificial devil fruits. Whole Cake Island gave us the story of Judge and his clones, as well as what we now know as a Mads clone, and Wano told the story of Queen and the bioweapons. And all of that is finally coming together now on Egghead Island. It's like Oda has some sort of checklist every time he plans an arc, which he probably does. One where he's been deliberately going, okay, so we need a Mads character in this arc. And you know, Egghead might actually be my favorite arc in a long time, because it's short, action-packed, hilarious, and just chock full of long-term payoff. In other clone-based news, we now know that the Seraphim have a degree of self-control, which I suppose was programmed to make them that much more dangerous as weapons. Although in this case, it has resulted in a very poor tactical maneuver, because now any Vegapunk can just retake that command. Although the two Vegapunks that were sent to do this are very high up on my traitor list. Edison and Lilith were found to be very suspicious in the traitor video I made, and that would be a good twist to ensure a despairful ending of Egghead. That moment of victory as a Vegapunk takes command, only for them to reveal that they were some sort of disgusting traitor. Otherwise, I'm feeling pretty good about the situation, because it would then take one of the 5 elders appearing to make things go really bad otherwise. Although who knows, maybe there's a clone of the 5 elders just hanging around somewhere, because nothing, and I mean nothing, is out of the question anymore with One Piece. Zoro vs Kaku was everything I hoped for and more. I especially enjoyed Zoro's line about being so sick of fighting animals after Wano, and I was a bit surprised that Kaku had also awakened his devil fruit, which look ridiculous, but so awesome. It evokes the same sort of feeling in me that Luffy's Gear 5th does. I wonder who awoke their fruit first, Kaku or Lucci, because whoever did it clearly just copied the other one. Both of them have the funky black flame effect happening, and it looks like this is Oda's new chosen way to depict awakened Zoans, which is good because it does simplify things, and if we see Zoan users in the future, there's less argument about whether or not they've awakened. Although it does create all sorts of new arguments, because Kaido, he had those flames, but were they just part of the base fruit? My absolute favorite part of the chapter though was watching Lucci and Kaku get betrayed by Stussy. It's just us. And Lucci's face when he saw that betrayal was like, betrayal? Us? And after they betrayed us on Water 7, I can't help but feel a sort of schadenfreude of, yeah, you got betrayed. Remember when you guys were pricks to us? It doesn't feel good, does it? But the question remains, why did Stussy betray them? At this point, she has legitimately become one of the most interesting characters in One Piece. Very Bartholomew Kuma in that she has multiple identities and allegiances, seemingly within all aspects of the global power structure. She's an underworld emperor, she's a CP0 agent, and a rogue vampire, likely working for someone else. With the first thought being that she is the ally that Vegapunk was talking about. I hope not, and I really don't think it would have been possible to conduct a snail call without either Kaku or Lucci noticing, but otherwise it would make a lot of sense. However, the other option is that because Stussy is a clone of a former Rocks Pirates member, she may be in league with the man who has inherited the will of Rocks, Mr. Marshall D. Teach. So cue the Stussy is the 10th Titanic captain theories. Imagine if Blackbeard took command of the Seraphim. That's very much the extra push he needs to go full main antagonist. But we could also have a more standard and boring solution as well. Those happen. Because the fact is that Rob Lucci, he was a bad cat, and he ignored the orders to wait for Kizaru. So Stussy could still be working for the world government and just salvaging the situation as best she can. However, the opening of the chapter has me thinking. Oda did something very clever, because we began with Vegapunk's past notes about someone who he considers to be human, which was juxtaposed against images of Jewelry Bonnie. And initially, it made me think that he was referring to Bonnie as a result. So when Stussy was revealed to be the clone, I was all like, you got me there, Oda, nice red herring. But now, I'm kind of flipping back to the other position, and I'm starting to think, what if this is a double red herring? Again, first successful clone implies that there were more, and perhaps Stussy is a vehicle being used to introduce the concept of cloning before we ultimately reveal that Jewelry Bonnie is also a clone. And maybe that's why Vegapunk and Kuma were so insistent that she never know the truth. Perhaps the original Bonnie has long since departed this world, and a distraught Kuma went to Vegapunk to try and bring his daughter back to life. And we'll be expanding upon all of that and more in the next video.
The world is finally making its move. The highest authority on the planet is on his way to Egghead Island, complete with Pet Admiral. And I know I say this every week, but it keeps being true every week. One Piece has dropped bombshells plural on us. Because we have a confirmed Rox, a confirmed clone ally, a suddenly unconfirmed presence, as well as a confirmed name, and it's a pretty awesome name as well. So much confirmation, and yet all it seems to do is open up brand new questions. And also one very special mystery. A certain character pops up in this chapter who you probably didn't recognize, but he did, and he certainly did not go unnoticed by all. But we're gonna start with the big stuff. Look, on paper, this was a rather bland ending, because our last page is essentially telling the story of an old man venturing out of the retirement home to go on a day trip. And this is a great example of the One Piece effect. The same series that gets me endlessly hyped about seeing numbers on paper can also make me hyped about an old man moving. Not even doing any special movement. Just the fact that he's moving at all is the mind-blowing thing. Seeing one of the 5 Elder Stars venture out into the world is one of the major events that I've been waiting for, because this is a big indicator that One Piece is getting into some very serious endgame. These are the big bosses, and it's finally time to start tackling them. And the fact that he gets a name as well is almost surreal. Again, I can't believe I'm excited that an old man has a name, but here we are. Saint J. Garcia Saturn, although we'll need to wait for confirmation on exactly how that name is spelt, but it sounds pretty incredibly epic, and it solves 20% of a mystery that first began almost 20 years ago when the 5 Elder Stars were introduced in chapter 233, which is a notable chapter for other reasons given that the chapter cover is black. To the best of my knowledge, it's the only black cover in the series, and it was done as Oda's tribute to the passing of a fellow mangaka named Gin Shinga, which I just thought I'd drop as a bit of a fun fact there because it'll never fit into any other video. But Mr. Saturn interests me quite a bit, because the natural assumption then becomes, well, are all of the elders named after planets? But the question is more accurately, are all of the elders named after Roman gods? Saturn being a particularly fickle god encompassing time, abundance, wealth, agriculture, generation, dissolution, and renewal. And I'm convinced that Saturn just picked a couple of random words from the dictionary for those last 3, because, you know, he wanted to be the god of more stuff. But also, and this is incredibly ironic, Saturn is the god of liberation, which is very much not what the 5 Elder Stars represent, and is in fact very much what Luffy represents. But I wouldn't be at all surprised to discover that the other 4 elders are also named after Roman gods, like your Mercuries, your Jupiters, and your Marses, or any of the other Sailor Scouts you can think of. And the Roman theming is very appropriate. It is, of course, the most famous historical society of global domination, lavish excess, and inevitable collapse. But it also stands in contrast to the Great Kingdom, which seems to be much more associated with the Greek gods via the ancient weapons, Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus. And before someone in the comments section tries to tell me that Poseidon is a Roman god, there's always one or two of you and you're always wrong, the god you're thinking of is Neptune, who in One Piece is a big hairy merman who gave birth to Poseidon. I say gave birth as if Neptune popped her out himself, which to the best of my knowledge, he didn't. But look, here is the crazy part. Post-time skip, the 5 Elder Stars have now officially moved more than Sakazuki, who has just been stuck in his office and various marine briefing rooms. And look, I think it's a pretty grim indictment of life circumstances when someone who should be in palliative care is getting more exercise than you. I also love how casual Kizaru is when interacting with Mr. Saint Saturn, and I think that really hammers home part of why Garp never took up the admiral position, because at times it's more of a demotion to being a glorified waiter. And no offense to the food service industry, but I think we should separate our military leaders from our food staff. They shouldn't mix. I don't want my military leaders serving food in the same way that I don't want my waiters leading battles. Although, the elder twist is far from unexpected though. In fact, as soon as the command hierarchy was revealed, I've been mentioning the possibility of an elder appearing at almost every single opportunity I've had. Sometimes Oda is just a little bit predictable, and it's because he constructs his stories nigh on flawlessly. But it leads to things like seeing Chekhov's clone command hierarchy and going, alright, look, Oda's not going to lay that brick unless it's part of the foundation for the house. And in this case, the Seraphim are starting to seem much more like a liability to have around the Vegapunks than the Straw Hats, almost as if they'd be safer without them, because at any time they could be forced to switch sides. Like a double-edged sword, except one sword is permanently nestled under your sabos. Probably the most exciting part about this development is that none of the Straw Hats have ever met the 5 Elder Stars. In fact, come to think of it, almost no character in the series has met the 5 Elders. You've got Sakazuki, Shanks, Eam, now Kizaru. I think there's another random Marine in there as well. And I guess in film Red, Lucci was hanging out with the Elders for reasons. But otherwise, they are very fresh characters in the sense that we don't know how they're going to interact with others. So I find that that very exciting. Currently on Egghead Island, Stussy has been revealed as the mystery ally, which I'm not quite sure how much I buy, just because I don't see how she conducted a secret phone call without Lucci or Kaku noticing. But you know, whatever, she's a secret agent clone succubus, so she can do sneaky things. Like that near instant dismissal of Lucci, that was sneaky. And I loved watching Lucci's look of horror because it was all like, no, not lipstick and a gentle nibble on the neck. You fiend, how did you know my one weakness? And obviously it's more about sea stone and, tactics, but I have no sympathy for Lucci. None at all. I have a lot more sympathy for Hattori though, because he looks legitimately distressed by Lucci's defeat. And I hope for Hattori's sake, and Hattori's sake alone, that Lucci makes a swift recovery. I mean, he's going to need it, having been beaten twice in one arc. I mean, this is bad. This is starting to be like Smoker levels of losing. Also, this happened very quickly, but is Stussy joining the crew? ? Having betrayed the world government, I suppose there's not really much other choice, which I suppose is a dream come true for Sanji now having 3 gorgeous comic book women join at the same time. But it's very in keeping with One Piece, by which I mean that Stussy is the latest in a long line of femme fatale characters that turns out to be good in the end, which is kind of a shame just because we've already got a rather large collection of those. But I am very excited to see how she interacts with the crew. And I guess from here on out, we'll be getting to know the true Stussy, which I imagine means that she'll get some very sudden comical character quirks. Something that still doesn't quite add up though is who lowered the Labosphere defenses. It can't have been the mystery ally because the mystery ally is no longer a mystery, it's Stussy, and Stussy did not have access. It also can't have been planned by the Vegapunks as some sort of strategy because they were super confused when it happened. So there's still something very, very sneaky happening here. And perhaps it has something to do with the massive mystery dump that Oda took into the toilets of our mind brains, because Vegapunk has vanished. This one panel left me completely dumbfounded. I swear, I was left staring at it for a minute or two because all of a sudden Stella has disappeared, like completely out of nowhere. Or perhaps I should say completely into nowhere. Here's the thing though. The reason why this panel floored me is because the words are coming from the narrator. And the narrator usually only gets used by this when describing an event of historical significance. Think stuff like when the Grand Fleet formed. The narrator said, these guys, they're gonna do something pretty big later. So events carry a lot more weight when the narrator interjects, because it's like an important historical footnote. Because, and this may surprise you, One Piece is a story. A story not just being told to us by Oda, but a historical tale that in world is being told by this narrator. Now, before I said that this happened completely out of nowhere, but that's not quite true. Vegapunk has vanished before when he left Luffy and Bonnie and told them to meet him at the place. And at the time, I wasn't quite sure if this was invisibility or teleporting or some sort of third wacky technological option. Whatever the case, it's an established fact that Stella can vanish at will, which I think is very relevant because it implies that Vegapunk likely wasn't captured or, victim to some sort of accident. He probably made himself disappear. And to this, you're probably asking, pourquoi? If you're French, that is. Because allegedly you don't have a word for why, so you just have to ask for what. And all I'm gonna say is that things are looking just a little bit sus for Mr. Stella right now, whether that susosity is being caused by him or inflicted upon him. And all I really am right now is ridiculously confused. So let's chase that confusion with some fight battling. Because Zoro is in the chapter, so automatic A+ experience. But this is especially special because he gets to fight against Mihawk, kind of. There is something so damn cool about Zoro confronting a more juvenile Mihawk and causing that look of overwhelming power on his face. The same look that the real Mihawk inflicted on Zoro during Baratie. And I didn't expect to reference the Lion King in this video, but this is simply the circle of life. The King of Hell is also very appropriately demonic here, commenting that, there's still some humanity left in there after all, huh? And Zoro, he doesn't speak often, but when he does, his words cut sharper than his swords. And it's quite vague, but I wonder if this is Zoro comparing S-Hawk to the actual Mihawk. Because if so, that would be a pretty interesting thing to learn about the world's greatest swordsman, someone who contains little to no humanity. But it could also be more simple than that. Zoro could recognize that S-Hawk is, he's definitely not going to guess clone cyborg Lunarian, but something along those lines. Actually, you know what? Why wouldn't he guess Lunarian? Zoro is like the only person who saw what King was, so he could go, hey, you look like the dude I just beat. But then Zoro, he rubs his eyes and realizes, actually, on closer inspection, you look like the dude I'm about to beat. And just like Zoro's quest for general sharp object superiority, we are far from done here. Cut to Sphinx Island, and Miss Buckin has now been confirmed as Miss Buckingham Stussy of the Rocks Pirates, which is a little awkward because I have a video coming out that says something along the lines of, no, nothing has been confirmed, and now I'm just gonna look like a fool on the internet. But to be fair, that's nothing new. What is new is Miss Buckin's role within Mads as a self-proclaimed scientist, which I love because she clearly has no real scientific scientific skill whatsoever. It's more like Queen, Caesar, Judge, and Vegapunk got together, and Miss Buckin was also there. And at this point, Edward Weevil is like 99.9% a clone, because I think Miss Buckin's line regarding that is about as clear as Raid Suit Sanji in a women's bathhouse. But I still find it really funny the way that Buckin said it. You still doubt that Weevil is Whitebeard's biological son? Well, just ask Vegapunk. Keeping in mind that Marco at this point assumedly doesn't know anything about clones. So from his perspective, it's like Buckin saying that Vegapunk was watching whilst Whitebeard and Buckin made sweet yet tremor-inducing pirate love. Also, new question, where do we all stand on clone rights? Since Weevil is technically Whitebeard, does he have a right to all of Whitebeard's stuff? Well, Weevil is going to have some time to ponder that question as he was captured after an off-screen fight battle with one Admiral Ryokugyu. Nice to see you again, mate. Although I wish I would have actually seen you, because this fight would have been amazing to watch. Mostly because I love Green Bull's Devil Fruit, and Weevil is a character that I really want to know more about. But it looks like our Admiral has redeemed himself after that unfortunate Shanks incident. And now, here is the special guest character that you may not have noticed. In the flashback, we see an undeniably rat-faced man who looks shockingly similar to the East Blue Marine Nezumi. It's a bit weird because they don't look similar enough for me to confidently say that yes, this is Nezumi, but they also look way too similar to ignore. I mean, what are the odds that two separate Marines have this rat aesthetic going on? They've got the whiskers, they've got the ears, they've got the general dickery, they have everything. So I would propose that this is perhaps Nezumi's older brother or something, which I imagine is going to be a question answered by Oda in a future SBS, because that's where all of these small connections are made. But poor Marco, every time he thinks he's out, something pulls him back in. Or in this case, pulls him buck in. That was a terrible pun. I would like to formally apologize and hand in my resignation as a talking internet man. But this may very well lead Marco back to the Straw Hats, as all of these threads are now being tied together in a very Vegapunk-centric saga. You've got the Seraphim, you got the Rocks, you got the Weevil, you got the Bonnies and the Kumas, your revolutionary armies, and even the Elbaf. This is such a classic saga introduction. It reminds me of Punk Hazard, where Oda dumped all of the seeds that would eventually grow into Dressrosa, Whole Cake Island, and Wano. So I think we should savor what's happening right now, because this could very well be our final setup arc in One Piece. Egghead is likely to be the narrative launching point to the end of the series, and exactly where we go next, I don't know, but I absolutely cannot wait to find out. This is big news. New Pacifista, old princess, same unknown traitor, and one hell of an arc climax incoming. How is it even possible that Egghead Island is this good? This is legitimately starting to feel less like a fun mini arc and more like a full-scale war. And speaking of war, chapter 1074 officially marks 500 chapters since the death of Ace. Don't know why I felt the need to point that out, but I did, so chuck an F or whatever letter it is you want in the chat and let's move on. One of the big revelations we have in 1074 are the new Mark III Pacifista models, which means that Vegapunk is now adopting the naming scheme of Canon cameras. I really like the design of these guys, although I have to admit that all of the various Kumas or Kumai, they're all starting to blur into one in my head. There are just so many different variants that I legitimately had a moment last week where I was like, did I imagine the policeman Kuma? Was that just a fever dream? But the Mark III Pacifista have a brand new weapon, or more accurately, a new defense, a defense bubble shield, which is very cool, and it immediately made me think of Sambadi. I think for some people, they went to Caliph's Devil Fruit, which makes bubbles to be the inspiration for this, but I feel like it's a lot simpler. Back during the original Sambadi arc, Oda went to great lengths to explain the fictional science behind how these bubbles are naturally constructed. And this panel in particular from chapter 496 has been cited by Oda himself as his second favorite panel in the entire series. I repeat, the entire series. And we don't particularly know why this is. But what we do know is that Oda has always kept bubbles in mind. He's a big fan of bubbles. And in a way, what the new Pacifista are creating really is just a more advanced and on-demand version. It's also quite similar to coding a ship in order to travel down to Fishman Island, which given the extreme water pressure would need to be pretty damn strong bubbles. Even if it's unintentional though, I do like the callback to Sambadi. In fact, a lot of this arc so far has been filled with Sambadi callbacks, and the arc itself could even be a bit of a 2.0. But we have a massive 50 Mark III units, which, that's a lot, and I'm wondering if they follow the same command hierarchy as the Seraphim do. As in, Centaur released them, but a Vegapunk could take priority, and then the Elder Stars could assume absolute authority. Because if so, then releasing these guys could do much more harm than it does good. Basically handing Saint Saturn a whole army of Kumamamums in addition to the Seraphim. To be fair to Sentomaru though, you would never anticipate one of the elders actually leaving the retirement home. But this is the overwhelming factor I've been waiting for. Egghead Island up until this point has been a fairly individual affair, a gaggle of straw hats versus an assortment of zoo creatures, but this is rapidly escalating into a potentially massive battle. This chapter also serves as a very standard beat in most One Piece arcs, which is the story collation, that part where all of the separate groups come together and form a plan to really kick the rest of the arc right in the sabos. Although it's happening at quite a rapid pace here. A lot of arcs do begin with the Straw Hats splitting up and having all sorts of fun, wacky adventures, meeting the people, seeing the sights. That's the adventure part of the arc. Then with all of the information they find, they have this moment of coming together to form a game plan. That's what's happening here right now. And then they usually split up again to implement said plan, which generally takes us to the end of the arc. Before we get there though, at long last, we have some much needed drip for the rest of our crew, and it's hard not to focus on Zoro first, because he has, in my opinion, easily the best Egghead Island outfit, because holy crap does he look like the main character all of a sudden. And I love the touch of placing the swords on his back as opposed to his side, makes him look all kind of cool, sleek, and assassin-y. Brook is also not to be neglected though. I love his outfit because Brook has this amazing ability to be a bit of a fashion chameleon. Due to the fact that he's a literal skeleton, there is no such thing as an outfit too wacky for Brook. So he wears everything to perfection, be it a gentlemanly suit, a rock style getup, or in this case, a space skeleton. We also have a new outfit that I did not expect, which was Stussy. She looks great, but I can't help but think that a future version of Kinemon was in charge of the Egghead Island fashion, decreeing that all men shall be covered from head to toe in sleek black suits, whilst all women shall be devoid of pants entirely, which is a bit inconvenient because look, just where is Stussy going to hide that sea stone lipstick now, huh? You might think that there are certain organic options, but she's a devil fruit user, so you can't do that. But more so than anything, this is what makes me feel like Egghead still has a fair chunk to go. For a while, it felt like it was going to end very soon, but if we're giving the rest of the crew new outfits, then yeah, we need some time to use them. Well, not use, I guess you don't really use outfits. To show them off, to do the fighting whilst looking cool, which is not what that is. My favorite panel of the chapter is this glorious mess that a lot of people are probably going to complain about being cluttered. Rah, 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 Oda paneling too busy, rah, rah. You know how they do. Funnily enough, they don't actually finish their sentences because extra words makes them too cluttered. But this panel is a goldmine of character interactions. I love Nami kicking Lucci while Robin is standing there trying to calm her down, like, no, you don't have to do it. Stop kicking the unconscious leopard man. It's a really sweet moment because you get to see how much Nami cares for Robin, and simultaneously how mature Robin is by trying to stop her, despite Robin being the one who by all rights should be doing the kicking. Then I also really enjoy this interaction with Usopp and Shaka. And I know that Usopp is looking at the monitor, but to me it just looks like he's staring straight at Shaka's butt. And very intensely as well. Like there's a lot of detail to take in on that there butt. He's got his glasses on and everything. It's just like, just calm down, mate, calm down. Sanji is also simping in the background over York, finally. And she is huge! I think this is the first chapter to properly depict the scale of York, because I definitely thought she was much more regular sized. And I think this will trigger a certain portion of humanity. You know, the same sort of people who were awakened by Lady D from Resident Evil. You know the ones. Seeing Luffy and Zoro just chilling with Lucci and Kaku on the floor is a close second favorite panel though, because seeing these two enemies who I once thought were overwhelming being casually dismissed like this is fantastic, although I don't quite trust that they're still unconscious. There's something about Kaku's face in particular that makes me feel real suspicious about that giraffe man. And I wonder if Lucci and Kaku are going to continue to be involved in this adventure, like if they're somehow forced to escape with everyone and into this smoker style arrangement of working with the Straw Hats. It's hard to say because again, it looks like we've only actually just reached the midpoint of the arc, and I definitely don't think they'll be out of action for the rest of Egghead. There's still something, I don't know what it is, but there's something left to happen with both of them. Also, fun note, Luffy's shoes are flagged as being broken in this chapter, which is almost certainly going to be very, very relevant in the future. Like say a situation where a certain traitor reveals themselves and does something dastardly like locking down everyone's shoes. But luckily, because Luffy's got broken, I'm free and I can defend against the bad person. Something like that. But yes, there is still a traitor to be found as we are now locked in the upper area, which makes the whole escape thing a bit difficult. But also, we may very well have just experienced a character death. Pythagoras got caught up in a bit of a big boom, although of all of the things I don't trust in One Piece, explosions are the least trustworthy of all of the death methods. I mean, Pythagoras is a robot, I suppose, so that might make Oda more willing to actually kill him. It's just that One Piece thing though, you can never trust events like this at face value. Although part of me is starting to wonder if what we're going to see from here on out are the satellites being taken down one by one, very Among Us style, which is only helped by the fact that we've all decided to split up again. Group meeting is over, so it's time to give our traitor their opportunity. The way this chapter paints events would imply that Lilith is the one who offed Pythagoras, because she, Pythagoras, and Stella are the only punks not present in the big cluttered group shot. But also, we don't know when this happened. Pythagoras was exploded after everyone split up, so it could still be anyone. And one of those anyone that we've ignored for quite a while is Caribou, because he would be quite the ideal natural traitor. However, I find it very difficult to believe that he would be able to access and use all of the Vega tech around the island. He would need to be guided by someone, which means that even if it was him, he would not be the true mastermind. But it is interesting that he's been completely MIA for a very, very long time. Although he is theoretically trapped with everyone else in the upper area right now. I still can't take my mind off Shaka though. He just seems very in control of the situation, which is allegedly spiraling out of control. And you've got mask theory and everything to add on top of that. He's just a naturally suspicious dude guy. People have also started posing the idea that Vegapunk's detached brain might be taking on an entity of its own. So in essence, there is no traitor and it's more like a classic AI takeover situation. It's such a fascinating scenario though. People called me paranoid when I made that video about an Egghead Island traitor, but there is definitely someone working against us in the shadows here. Also, is it just me, or has this arc really amped up the betrayals? Stussy betrays the world government betrays Vegapunk, and now we're in a situation where Vegapunk is potentially also betraying Vegapunk. And among all of this is a really touching story involving Bonnie and Kuma, which we got a really tiny depressing appetizer of in this chapter. Oda is edging this story so hard right now. Every time it seems like we're about to dive in, Oda is just like, no, not yet. But this is not the first time we've seen Kuma as a child. That comes to us courtesy of this image, which looks like it takes place around the same time period, with our young bear lad looking like he's living quite the poor village lifestyle. Also, fun fact, he has human ears as a child, but he doesn't have human ears as an adult. They've like migrated up here and they've become quite bear-like. But we see two groups of people in this Kuma flashback, both absolutely abhorrent people. There's what looks like his fellow villagers, or I suppose people that just live in his general vicinity, but we also have a glimpse of the world nobles. And the heavy implication is that Kuma was tortured by them, perhaps as a slave, but also not necessarily. It's hard to tell exactly what they're doing. He could also be a test subject or something. But this brief flashback really recontextualizes the Red Line climb, because as a child, Kuma fled Marijois and he was scared, terrified to go back. But now, as a much bigger Kuma, it looks like his final life's act is going back to Marijois. And I imagine we'll discover the reason why in the full flashback, but this climb is probably going to end up hitting us pretty hard. But the real big news is that my favorite bird, other than Southbird, you're always my favorite, but another bird is back and he has some familiar faces with him. Is it bad that I'm more excited to see Walpole than I am Vivi? I feel like a lot of people don't like Walpole. I love Walpole. But I'm a huge fan of minor and mostly comical One Piece antagonists in general, and so I love that Walpole is still getting involved. It's not even a random appearance either. It's not like Oda spun the wheel and decided, let's throw in Walpole. Because Walpole was the one who leaked information to Morgans. But also pairing him with Vivi is brilliant, because the two of them already have a pretty deep series history. Walpole, of course, met Vivi at a prior reverie, and by met, I mean he struck her in the face. And then, of course, Vivi was present on drum when Walpole was beaten, and now this whole thing has come full circle with them meeting at another reverie. So the stories of Walpole and Vivi are pretty bizarrely linked, and child abuse aside, it's really fun to see them together. I will say that Vivi seems oddly casual for someone whose father was just murdered. She's less sad and more mildly annoyed at circumstances than anything, and it did make me wonder if Cobra could be alive, and this whole assassination thing is a clever ruse by someone. Then again, sometimes Oda isn't really great with character feelings. People in the One Piece world generally go one of two ways. They either never get over a character death for their entire lives, they carry it with them, or they get over a character death almost immediately. Like say Kiku during Wano, who was so unaffected by her brother's death that we never even saw her reaction to it, nor did she go to bury Izo with everyone else, instead favoring some bath time with the ladies. Now, as for who leaked this information to Morgans, I think it's fairly safe to say that it was Stussy. Those two have a working relationship, which we saw at play during Whole Cake Island, and if Stussy was really betraying the world government, then informing Morgans about all of their not so great actions would be a great way to swing public opinion against them, which Morgans knows, and hence why he isn't going to do it. it, because Vegapunk is a very popular man. So to sensationalize this and create the best entertainment, we need to find a villain to blame. Someone who the world can get upset at but not, start a revolution at. For years I've said that Big News Morgans is the most powerful character in One Piece simply due to his influence, and we are about to see that influence at work. Morgans not only knows, but in this case, holds a lot of very important pieces. He's almost like Oda himself. He is controlling the flow of information in order to tell the most exciting story possible, and his actions here are going to have extraordinary ripple effects throughout the world, which we will be examining in the next video. What is going on? One Piece just took a very unexpected turn. Our wacky fun pirate adventure has all of a sudden become a visceral sci-fi horror, featuring unstoppable murder machines, a silhouetted monster lurking in the darkness, and even a traitor among us. But in order to compensate, Monkey Man and Cat Man are now the best of friends, crafting an alliance that I never expected to see outside of fanfiction. Just what the crap has One Piece turned into? It's such a chameleon series. It can literally become any genre and characters can slip in and out of any role. I really don't know how it's possible to feel horror movie style tension when we have a sun god on our side, but Eiichiro Oda is definitely achieving that here. Alright, so we've got a lot to dive into. This chapter was packed with details, character moments, and some interesting setup for the future of Egghead Island. The first major development is that we now have our arc standard Oda map. I love these so much because they're such a fantastic way of keeping track of complex movements in the most simple way possible. And given that we've now got 5 different groups moving around, this is very necessary, albeit a bit of an English brain melt, because we have buildings A, B, and C, except it's more accurately building C, A, and B. A is in the middle because A is the most important, B is on the right because Japanese reads right to left, which makes C last for them but first for us. So these letters are an indirect antithesis to everything my English brain considers normal. But in the 3rd floor of building A, we find a group consisting of Nami, Brook, and Edison, which is a very intriguing group. In particular, I can't remember a lot of Nami and Brook interactions off the top of my head that aren't based purely in the realm of panties, the panty realm. And come to think of it, I guess Brook doesn't need to ask to see Nami's panties anymore because they're just right there. They're on display. I see them. But this group is what I would describe as a little bit underpowered, but that's for good reason. Oda has masterfully split these groups in order to highlight the weaker members of the crew. This group is the ultimate example of that because they don't have a crew heavy hitter like your Zoros or your Sanjais. And you know what? Even Edison isn't exactly the most accomplished of Vegapunks in regards to the old punch fighting. And this is why the horror movie style tension works. Because it's not Luffy, Zoro, or Sanji that we're ever worried about, but a group of Nami, Brook, and Edison. Ooh, they're vulnerable. If they encounter a Seraph, this group has no option but to run away. Something I really loved about this section was the Nami nostalgia. It feels like it's been so long since we've seen that treasure lust in her eyes. It takes me back to pre-time skip One Piece, because Nami's greed is one of the OG Straw Hat quirks. I will say I'm a bit surprised that Nami actually left the diamonds behind though, instead of, say, making Brook carry them, because I'm sure he would oblige. Brook is he's like a soft Sanji. He's not full simp, but he's certainly cooperative to female whims. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Caribou come along and scoop up those diamonds in his swampy self. He tends to enjoy shiny things as well as sticking said shiny things inside him. It's what he does. But I'm really excited about this group because Nami and Brook are 2 Straw Hats that we really don't get anywhere near enough of. And you know what? We may not necessarily get a lot of them here either, but within this trio, they are the protagonists, and I'm very much looking forward to their bizarre adventure. Right below them on the 2nd floor of building A is the fantastic combination of Robin, Chopper, and Atlas. I say fantastic because I love the Robin Chopper dynamic. She obviously adores Chopper and constantly gives him all sorts of tasty treats, but Chopper also quite consistently gets terrified of Robin due to her morbid outlook on life, which we saw here actually. The whole, I thought that was Vegapunk chopped into little bits, which I loved because Robin's humor is one of the most underrated and underutilized in the series. But the whole aspect of being able to grow organs might be seeding something quite important, because that's obviously an invaluable benefit to the world of medicine, which I hear that Chopper holds a little bit of interest in. In fact, this whole chapter, or really this whole arc, is geared towards the idea of dreams becoming reality. There's this medical insanity that would revolutionize Chopper's dream. There's a whole ton of Void Century intrigue which links into Robin's dream, and being able to create treasure while not strictly speaking being Nami's dream is something that she would consider a dream. And it's like an allegory for where the series actually is. We're in the end game. We're at the point where dreams themes are starting to become actually tangible. And you know what? You even have that to some degree with Zoro facing off against S-Hawk, because that's like a stepping stone in him being ready to take on the actual Mihawk. In regards to Atlas, there's an interesting but brief conversation about masks and faces, and admittedly I'm probably reading a bit too much into this, but whenever there's a mysterious entity or a traitor-like element, I tend to hyper-focus on this sort of stuff, because it makes me think, okay, so could any of the Vegapunks go and impersonate one to add further confusion here? I mean, that would probably be harder to do in the case of someone like Atlas because she's huge, but the Vegapunks who are, more similar size, that could be a thing. Moving next door to Building B, we have a team of Sanji on the second floor, and joining him are Stussy and fellow Hawaiian shirt enthusiast Jinbei. The two of them look like they're going on a vacation, like they're having a boys' weekend away that escalates into a hangover-style situation. Sanji does recognize Stussy and mentions the tea party, which is very uncouth of him. I mean, how dare he be checking out other women during his own wedding? Bad, Sanji, bad. I do like that Stussy is taking full advantage of him though, because Stussy is the kind of character who really wields her sexualness as a weapon. And as it turns out, Sanji, just like the Seraphim, has a command hierarchy. Because before Stussy joined up, he was at Lilith's disposal. However, after Stussy joined, she took priority of Sanji, and now he is her dog. This is such an overpowered group though. You've got Sanji, you've got an ex-warlord, and you've got a CP0 agent. Nobody is messing with this group. On the third floor of Building C, we have another vulnerable grouping, consisting of Usopp, Frankie, Lilith, York, and Pythagoras, or actually I suppose part of Pythagoras. And this is another group where I really felt the tension. Because Frankie, yeah, he's powerful, but we're talking about Seraphim here. So I have legitimate concern for them. Pythagoras did that really annoying thing that only ever happens in media and never in real life, where he alludes to having the answer to the mystery that we all really need to hear right now, but doesn't actually say it. Thankfully, Oda is very self-aware of this by having him get angrily yelled at, but I hate when this happens in any media. Because it's like, I get it. It's the best decision narratively to keep the mystery and the fun in the air, but mate, just spit it out. Before getting into the action, Lilith mentions her bubble gun, which appears to be a more portable version of what the Mark III Pacifista are equipped with. And it's almost like a fusion of the Sabati bubbles with Kuma's Devil Fruit ability of being able to push anything away. I guess sort of like how Vegapunk learned to imitate Kizaru's laser beams, and now we've also replicated Kuma's push powers. He pushes things. I don't know what happened there. I'm a bit surprised that York decided to go on a bit of a walk because, look, we don't know her very well, but that seems like a bad idea, and that she really probably should have stayed with Luffy, Zoro, and Shaka. However, the panel of her patting S-Snake on the head is so cute. Unlike S-Snake herself, who had like a full tonal flip in this chapter, S-Snake was very Children of the Corn here, especially with that slight smile she gave after attacking Team Usopp, as if to say to some degree she's enjoying the hunt. It's incredibly creepy, and I both love and hate it. This section also more or less confirms that a Vegapunk is responsible for doing the bad things it is that is being the traitor, because the Seraphim are attacking and the satellite Vegapunks cannot override that command. Although it's interesting because Edison commanded them to stop fighting, so in theory, can another punk recommand them to commence the fighting? I mean, I suppose it might follow a completion mechanism. Perhaps once an order is carried out completely, it then frees the system for new orders from any member of the hierarchy. So the Seraphim came to a stop, and then they were ready for new orders. And well, it's going to be a lot harder to get them to that completion stage now, though. In fact, in a weird twist, currently the only person who can stop their murderous pursuit is an Elder Star, because they're the only ones that can take priority over a Vegapunk. Otherwise, the Seraphim will just remain on this rampage eternally. Meanwhile, in the command room, which is the fourth floor of Building B, we have Luffy, Zoro, Shaka, a big cat, a bigger giraffe, a bear with wings, and a child with a sword. Lots of stuff, so much stuff happening here. And it was really cool to find out that the Seraphim were actively targeting CP0, because that makes sense. CP0 were ordered to kill the Vegapunks, so even though the traitor is a Vegapunk, it's still in Traitor's best interest to kill the CP0. The panel where Luffy saves Lucci and Zoro saves Kaku was absolutely surreal. To think that after everything they did, and honestly may still do to Robin, that we still can't let them die is definitely something else. I can't believe I'm saying this, but Rob Lucci has officially been crocodiled. And I know I said last week that Lucci and Kaku might become allies, but like seeing it actually happen is still so crazy. And it also resulted in the return of the Odin face, one of my all-time favorite expressions, washed across the splendid canvi that are Luffy and Zoro, which I think was a great full stop to the chapter. The whole thing was a perfect balance of humor and tension. You know, we have a funny joke and then serious tension. Tension which is then diffused by another funny joke, which then prepares us to build to more tension. And that sort of thing is very hard to do. It's a difficult balance to achieve. And what I need right now is some fan art of Lucci making the Robin I want to to-live expression, begging Luffy to free him and even take him out to sea. However, the single most impactful thing to me was that moment where Shaka spotted the silhouetted figure on the camera feed. This was quite the surprise, and my mind went through a couple of different options. One of which was that it could be S-Shark, because he isn't seen elsewhere in the chapter, and due to his fruit abilities, becoming a nebulous blob-type existence is quite natural. But at the same time, I feel like Shaka would have maybe recognized S-Shark. So then I thought Caribou. His swampiness could also result in this weirdo blob silhouette, and he may not be doing anything traitorous per se. This could be just him throwing a tantrum and doing what he can to escape the situation, because not every chaotic event has to be attributed to the traitor. Two things can be happening at the same time. That or Caribou is working for the traitor, because he's definitely in the lab. There is a swamp boy in the lab. He's trapped as well, and at some point we're going to learn why. But there's also been some ideas posed that the silhouette looks very similar to a certain Saint J. Garcia Saturn, and I guess it does in a very vague sort of way, but thinking along those lines requires a lot of extra layers of theory. Like say Saturn used someone else's fruit power, Bluno I guess, to get into the lab, or Saturn has some sort of long distance stand power, or Saturn has some kind of long distance devil fruit power that can replicate his form. Honestly, a stand would make more sense. That, or you can go even wilder and say that Vegapunk may very well have cloned his own set of Elder Stars that have now taken command of the situation. Which, look, as far-fetched as it is, I don't think it's the most insane idea considering everything we've experienced, and especially with Vegapunk's cover story currently playing out. I mean, I say Vegapunk's cover story. It was actually supposed to be Judge's cover story that Vegapunk kind of commandeered. But Mr. Vegapunk man himself is seen with the 5 Elder Stars, and this is an opportunity to grab some sneaky old man DNA for all kinds of sneaky research. Weird thing as well, Vegapunk looks relatively young on this chapter cover, but the Elder Stars, while still silhouetted, look pretty much exactly the same as they do today. Like, they haven't aged at all. They've just gotten significantly more visible. And I don't know, I keep going back and forth with this, but it is possible that Stella himself is the traitor. Recent cover pages have presented him with these more and more deranged expressions, so he may not be quite the innocent old dude man that we see him as. Or he could be, and all of this is some sort of elaborate plan to escape, sort of like a fake your own death, fake the deaths of all your satellites so that no one tries to pursue you. Whatever the case, we have several mysteries to solve, and with so much new information, we are going to be doing exactly that in the next video. This battle just turned into an all-out war. After the traitor sent out a bear and a bird, Luffy has chosen to counter this by releasing a cat and a giraffe. I'm honestly not quite sure how the type matchups work here, but it is still very exciting. Meanwhile, Zoro is stuck in a nightmare, currently facing off against almost all of his old enemies simultaneously. Also, Stella has been captured and is almost certainly not the traitor, and the biggest news of all is that we are about to dive into a conflict on Elbaf. Endgame One Piece is getting ridiculous in all of the best ways. And we are going to start with Zoro, because this chapter is like playing through an album of his greatest hits. In a weird fictional sciencey way, this chapter has incorporated almost all of Zoro's major series opponents. We have Mihawk in Seraphim form, who possesses the powers of Dar's Bones, next to an incarnation of Bartholomew Kuma. Technically, King is also represented, given that they've been spliced with Lunarian DNA. Also, Kaku is here, albeit as an ally. And you know what? Even Luffy counts as a Zoro opponent because they did fight that one time on Whiskey Peak. And this is the point where, look, if I was Zoro, I'd be going, all right, it's finally happened. My sense of direction is so bad that I've managed to lose my mind. And the craziest thing is, if we'd heard about this situation on paper even a year ago, it would have sounded like the cringiest fanfic imaginable. So Zoro's gonna fight a cyborg Mihawk who has the powers of both King and Dar's Bones. And also Kaku is going to be his ally. Out of context, it sounds bad. It sounds really bad. But in context, it sounds good. So damn good. And this is what separates the truly great writers from the people who also put words on pages. Because juggling all of these elements has no right to work anywhere near as well as it does. But Oda, much like an active teenager, relentlessly pulls it off with ease. But I love that most of these characters have nothing in common except for the demonic nexus that is Zoro. Mihawk, Dar's Bones, and Kaku, without Zoro, they may as well live in completely different series. So seeing everything converge on Zoro is so surreal, yet so amazing. Having mentioned it a couple of times now, yes, S-Hawk is a confirmed user of the Super Numi powers. I don't think this is a huge surprise. Most of us called this because it's a very natural power for a swordsman, very much turning him into a literal sword man, but also because Dar's Bones was imprisoned and impelled down, and so Vegapunk had clear access to his abilities. And I think this confirms that Vegapunk is more than likely able to replicate any paramecia power from a Devil Fruit user who has been caught by the world government, which is, it's a lot. It's many, so many. And funnily enough, this means that Zoro is actually directly responsible for S-Hawk being this powerful. Because if he didn't defeat Bones, then S-Hawk would not have this ability. The Zoro-Kaku team-up is also a very satisfying thing to see. As someone who caught up to the series during any slobby, seeing these two together is very nostalgic. And in a strange way, it's like a very twisted Zoro and Sanji combination with Kaku's emphasis on kicking. Actually, you know what? It goes deeper than that. Because this is what happens when you fuse Zoro, Sanji, and Usopp together. What you get is a long-nosed sword kicker. But I also loved the way that Luffy and Lucci teamed up. Although it was interesting to see that Luffy didn't elect to use Gear 5th. And at first I was like, look, what you doing, monkey man? Use the thing. Do it. Because theoretically, there should not be a reason to not use Gear Because theoretically, there should never be a reason to use a lower gear ever again. But then I remembered how tired Luffy was when talking to Zoro, and I imagine that that was a result of invoking Gear 5th. Thinking about it, Gear 5th is not at all an efficient form, because it has this effect where Luffy kind of gets high on freedom and mostly messes around with his opponents. I mean, yeah, he's basically invincible during this time, but it seems to be quite draining and there's no real way to min-max the form, as opposed to entering Gear 4th, which is a much more logical choice if you just need to deliver a quick smack in the sabos. Gear 4th is your daily business form. It's what you use when there is a thing that needs to be done and it needs to be done with no nonsense. Although in terms of storytelling, it's also because Oda doesn't want to go from 0 to 100 with this fight. Because looking at it, nobody uses their ultimate attacks or forms against the Seraphim yet. This really was more of a warm-up because there's no awakenings, no conquerors haki, nothing really special happening at all. Despite the fact that we know all 4 of these characters are capable of some very special stuff. I will say though that the Luffy comedy was on point, especially when Kaku gave that death glare and was all like, yeah, I promise that we will put the handcuffs back on. And Luffy believing that obvious lie is the kind of joke that will get me every time. Meanwhile, Lucci took a different, much more honest approach to the situation, which surprisingly yielded the same result as Kaku's deception. He just bluntly said, yeah, after I'm done, I'm gonna kill you. Then I'm gonna brutally murder all of the 7 Vegapunks. Then I'm going to slowly dissect each and every one of your crew as they scream for help. Also Stussy, I'm gonna kill Stussy. And after hearing all of that, Luffy just responded with, yeah, sure, you can do that, cat man, if you can beat me, which you can't. And that smack talk right there did more damage than any physical attack Luffy will ever be capable of conjuring. I love the confidence of Luffy in this moment because his mind operates on this form of mental double jeopardy, which is the principle that you can't be legally tried for the same thing twice. So in Luffy's head, the case of Nico Robin versus Rob Lucci has been resolved. There's no going back into it. We've beaten the cat, now the cat must accept the judgment under the Sun God law, who is actually Sun God Luffy. Basically, Luffy no longer sees Lucci as a threat, which I imagine is probably going to annoy a lot of power scalers who really went all in on that there Lucci hype. However, the matter has been decided. And now Oda has begun this process of making both Lucci and Kaku much more likable. I mean, they were likable before, I really liked Kaku, but I mean that we're expanding them comedically, which generally means, we're friends now, you're not a threat to us anymore. And it's really working with me at the very least, because after this chapter, I did genuinely like both Lucci and Kaku a lot more. I also like the idea that Lucci's outburst makes sense retrospectively, and that may be the whole reason why he wasn't allowed to talk during his mission on Water 7, because the world government, they knew that he would say something stupid, so they assigned him the role of a mute. You are only allowed to speak via pigeon. And in this way, we're really now starting to showcase the similarities between both Luffy and Lucci, as well as Zoro and Kaku. The former two are very simple, desire-driven individuals, whilst the second in commands are the types who attempt to think, but still end up doing really dumb things anyway. They are absolutely perfect companions. And when the cuffs came off, my god, was I hit smack bang in the nostalgia balls. Because back during Enies Lobby, we actually had the opposite situation, where Zoro and Usopp were cuffed and they were at the mercy of Kaku and Jabra. But now, the situation is flipped, with Kaku and Lucci being cuffed and at the mercy of 2 other big animal-y things. And I had a similar reaction to their cuffs coming off as I did with Zoro back in the day, which was a moment of uncontrollable hype, which only continued further seeing their attack panels, especially Luffy and Lucci, because both of them used former ultimate attacks, the Rokogun and the Kongun. And at certain stages in the series, those used to be the ultimate attacks for both of them, but now they are the base attacks. I also thought it was quite sweet when Luffy apologized to Bonnie before hitting Esper, despite the fact that Bonnie isn't actually briefly there. It's just one of those pure Luffy moments where he's so emotionally in tune with those around him that he knows the effect his actions are going to have. Sort of like an emotional future sight, I suppose, because Bonnie is also our friend now. And actually, it reminds me a lot of when Mihawk apologized to Shanks during the Paramount War before he attacked Luffy. In general, though, I really love the situation that's been set up, because One Piece now has a bit of a problem that its main characters are so stupidly powerful. Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji are now world-class combatants, so it's really hard to amp up the stakes when dealing with them, because almost nothing is an actual threat to them. But the genius thing that Oda's done here is spreading them too thin. Yes, whoever is with Luffy and Zoro, they'll probably be fine, but they can't protect everyone. As powerful as they are, they can't be everywhere at once and keep like 15 other people safe. So the tension comes from the need to problem solve. What do we do? How do we logistically make all of this work before our friends die? That sort of stuff. Speaking of, we do hear Nami in this chapter, although we don't see her, and I imagine that her group is being attacked by S-Shark, since he was the only Seraph that we don't currently know the location of. That, or maybe Nami ran into Carabo, and it's more of a comical scream, and eek, get away from me, swamp man. Or maybe it's even something else. We still know so little about the traitor and what other things might be in their traitorsome service. We do know one new thing though, which is that Stella is all but clear of any traitorous allegations, having been captured and imprisoned. I mean, sure, I guess it could be a very long con, but I don't think that One Piece is that type of series. The situation seems to be more like the traitor thwacked Stella in the head whilst Bonnie was in Kuma's memories. Then Bonnie's powers wore off and Stella turned back into his old man self. But one important thing here is definitely the missing Cypherpole agents featured imprisoned as well, because this is going back to the missing cells that Lucci flagged a while ago, which we've covered, but I'll say again, almost certainly means that the traitor has been traitorizing for at least 2 months now. So I don't think it's anyone who's a recent addition to Egghead Island, by which I'm mostly referring to Saint Saturn, because a lot of people seem to be really on board with the idea that the silhouette monster is him due to vague shapes. I don't think so though. I think it has to be a satellite or maybe even a hidden 8th Vegapunk. The most suspicious candidate to me is still Shaka, and this chapter did very little to alleviate that, especially when Shaka allowed Lucci and Kaku to be released, the former of which quite literally stated that he was going to kill all of the Vegapunks. So if I was some sort of science traitor and I wanted all of my Vegapunk comrades dead, then releasing an assassin ordered to kill my Vegapunky friends would seem like quite an efficient way to accomplish that. Although Shaka's actions were disguised as giving Luffy the choice. But Shaka, look, he's a pretty smart dude. Smart enough to allegedly see the logical pathway through to his own death. Shaka knew that Luffy would free Lucci, so I think it may have been a very calculated choice to give Luffy the key. And here's the big thing, when Shaka gave Luffy the key, he just said, you do you, bruh, do whatever. You make the choices. Just please make sure to protect Stella. Not protect the other Vegapunks. They don't matter. Only Stella. The others can die. I don't know, I could be reading far too much into this, but right now I am really invested in Shaka doing the bad thing for the purpose of the overall good of protecting Stella, because the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and Shaka is the literal personification of good intentions. So the road to hell is going to be paved with Shaka. We also have 2 more key pieces of information though. The first is that a whopping 100 marine ships are currently on their way to Egghead Island. 100 ships. To put that into some perspective, a Buster Call consists of only 10 ships. So this could be like 10 Buster Calls. Granted, not all of the vessels are going to be battleships, but it is still a massive fleet. In fact, we've not seen a marine fleet this big in the series ever. Even during the Paramount War, we didn't see many ships because it was more of a land-based affair. So we are in some pretty serious trouble here. And the second nugget drop is that Vegapunk has also been conducting poneglyph research, very much emphasizing the Ohara 2.0 situation happening here. And he may very well be that final key we're looking for to discover the location of the 4th road poneglyph. However, that issue may currently also be being litigated elsewhere, because we have a clash on Elbaf. Redhead Shanks versus similarly redhead Kid is happening, and this comes with so many revelations, familiar characters, and things I guarantee many of you overlooked in the chapter, so we're going to be diving into all of that in the next video. This is wild. This is one of the most brutal chapters in One Piece history, offering a Vegapunk decimating the Straw Hats and teasing us with some juicy traitor details. However, the more information we get, the less we seem to actually know. I don't think there has ever been a more exciting time to be reading One Piece specifically weekly. I mean, Marineford comes pretty close, but every week Egghead Island takes a radically new twist, and it all seems to be building up to an incident of historic proportions. That or an incident of not that, more like an incident intentionally erased from history, as suggested by rotund bodyguard Sentomaru, because his words in this chapter gave me legitimate chills. We already know that Egghead Island has the potential to be an even worse Ohara, because Ohara faced a buster core that's 10 battleships, whereas Egghead Island is facing the full wrath of the Marines with 100 ships, which, fun fact, I did check, and during Marineford there was only a fleet of 50 ships assembled to take part in the conflict against Whitebeard. So Egghead Island is currently getting twice as much naval firepower as the entire Paramount War, and we could ultimately end up with this being another Lelucia Kingdom style situation, which is tragic because there's a lot of civilians on this island, even if we haven't really explored them at all yet. I did really like the brief Ohara summary panel provided by the ever helpful Sentomaru. The characters were drawn adorably in Oda's chibi storybook style, and this was surprisingly necessary to provide. So think about it this way. The key demographic for One Piece is Japanese teenagers, and a lot of Japanese teenagers reading One Piece weekly probably were not even born when Water 7 was being published. So that's why panels like this exist. It really makes me appreciate Oda's planning process though, because this chapter gave us a lot of insight. With Oda knowing how important both Ohara and the Seraphim were going to be on Egghead Island, he took some very key time during the raid on Onigashima to seed both of those things and gently introduce or reintroduce them to the audience through things like Robin seeing the illusions of Olvia, Soul, and Clover. It's like playing story chess. Oda is always thinking several moves ahead to craft situations like this. Easily the greatest moment of the chapter was Zora's realization that the Seraphim are all just a little bit similar to King, and then everyone's comic reaction to it, especially Luffy. It is so rare to see Luffy calling someone out for their intelligence, and it just goes to show that Luffy and Zoro essentially share one brain cell, and in this case it was Luffy's turn to use it. I also love seeing Lucci and Kaku get upset, because this is exactly what I predicted. They are now well and truly fresh comic crop, ready to be harvested by Oda. It's proof that time heals all wounds. At one stage, Lucci was one of the most serious, evil, and just like generally detestable leopards we'd ever encountered. Or I guess people in general, it doesn't have to be a leopard, to the point where it would be absolutely impossible to even imagine him interacting like this. But roughly 15 years later, and now he's just our fun, fluffy cat Nakama. The action in this chapter was superbly drawn. There really wasn't a single panel that failed to blow me away, and they really made me feel the impact of what was happening. I like that Oda used Luffy's gear forth with Lucci's bulky Seimei skills. He gave them both a very similar chonksome physique. Meanwhile, Zoro and Kaku were physically portrayed as anthropomorphized blades, sleek, precise, and lethal. Plus, it's always a treat to see Zoro using Shishisonson. I always love the way Oda draws the perspective of it with the blade hilt in the foreground and just like, it's a truly beautiful attack. We also seem to be going through a brief history of Zoro in terms of attacks. He started out with, classic onigiri, East Blue goodness, and now we've moved on to Shishisonson. Shishisonson is hard to say. And now we've moved on to Shishisonson, acquired during Alabasta. So what's next? Maybe the pound cannon that beat Omon Skypiea, or we can skip that and go straight to Ashura, which is something I'm really hoping we see. Not just because I love Ashura, but because I would be incredibly keen to see Kaku's reaction to the attack that defeated him 2 years ago. Now, during this section, Shaka, that man, he did himself no favors in terms of being a suspicious dude guy. And I found it especially odd that he all of a sudden went, I am pretty sure I know where Stella is, and then just casually walked away. He didn't run. He didn't do it with any sense of urgency. He just turned his back and walked out like it was his lunch break or something. It's also a bit weird that it took Zoro to inform everyone about the Lunarians when Shaka should surely know their weaknesses as well. However, to be completely fair to Shaka, you could say the same about any of the Vegapunks. Each and every one of them should be aware of the Lunarian weakness. Also, to be fair to Shaka, he got shot in the head. So that's definitely a point in favor of his innocence. But we'll get to that situation in a bit because the end of this chapter just, it messed with my mind brain. So while I still have some coherence intact, this chapter was a complete and utter disaster for Team Usopp. They had the classic horror movie thing happen, you split up the group and then bam, immediate negative consequences. Who could have predicted that? I'm actually a bit surprised that Usopp lost to S-Snake because he actually has a very good track record of beating little girls. Even if Sugar is actually older than Usopp, she's 22 and he's only 19. But watching S-Snake be manipulative in what can only be described as blatant Hancockian behavior was great. Hancock is never afraid to use beauty to her advantage, and S-Snake is doing the same thing just with cuteness instead. More so than others, S-Snake seems like the most individual Seraphim. The others have this very mindless follower type vibe, and it makes me wonder if S-Snake's personality traits are going to manifest even further, like maybe even ultimately falling for Luffy. Because now we do have a bit of a big problem to solve. With Usopp and part of Frankie being petrified, along with all of York and Lilith, someone will need to order S-Snake to reverse the petrification. As we learned from Boa Hancock, simply killing the user will not reverse that power. Another example of Oda's story chest there, by the way, that gets planted into the Blackbeard conflict so that we can really raise the stakes of what's happening right here and right now. There is still some hope for this group though, as Frankie only became half a stone man, and some people have suggested that this is due to his cyborgian nature. But it's actually just how the attack works. This particular attack only turns the immediately struck area into stone, which we saw a lot of during Marineford. But it's looking pretty undeniably bad, because all this group has left is half of Frankie and the head of Pythagoras, which is unfortunate because Pythagoras almost certainly knows who the traitor/culprit is, and he is rapidly running out of people to actually tell because they're all so busy becoming statues. I guess their hope is that Jinbei or Stussy will appear, like how Sanji went to help Nami's group. Oh, and speaking of, that was also a complete disaster with Edison down and Brook literally decapitated, which is quite funny because when this trio formed, I made a comment that they seem very underpowered, and I got a ton of comments from angry people telling me that I should respect Brook because he's a big, strong bone man. And then what happens? Brook gets immediately decapitated off screen, and we're stuck relying on Nami, which isn't at all a bad thing, by the way. I love seeing Nami in desperate situations because she always steps up no matter how stacked the odds are against her. I will say Oda may have gotten a little bit sidetracked with this Nami action though, choosing to focus on action elsewhere, with probably the most shameless upskirt in the series, choosing to draw Nami from what I refer to as the toilet angle, because we are getting the exact same view of Nami as a toilet seat would. There was some good drama here though, because Nami is of course very protective of children, which spawns directly from her childhood abuse with Arlong. So attacking a child is a big thing for Nami, like a more watered down version of Sanji refusing to hit women. Now Sanji does enter rather demonically to save the day with all sorts of cool shading, very Zoro-esque really, and something I didn't immediately notice is that his eyebrow has changed direction again, meaning that Sanji has activated his genetic enhancements. And the reason he's here is because he must have heard the scream in the last chapter, although this leaves Jinbei and Stussy alone together, which is such a fun pairing because they have exactly one thing in common. So hey, remember that tea party? That was a pretty wild time. Oh yeah, especially when the whole chateau blew up for no reason. That was crazy. Oh, sorry, my bad. You see, that was me. There was a bomb in the tomate box and it all just went boom. Wait. There was a bomb in my people's most precious relic? Well, I should say there was a bomb because it's exploded now. Oh, fair enough. I bet it was that Minister of the Right. Seems like a very him thing to do. So what was in the box originally? Mostly drugs. Oh. That's nice. That is exactly how that conversation will go. But now we need to talk about the big moment of Shaka being shot in the Shaka head, drawn in a terrifyingly beautiful panel. You can really feel the impact of the bullet with Shaka's contorted and curved body. And you know, sometimes I legitimately forget that bullets can actually kill people in One Piece, because a lot of the time they're just meaningless. They do nothing. You get a horde of Marines around and it's like they're firing pellet shooters. But every now and then, Oda does draw a very impactful gun scene, like Charlos shooting Heart-chan or Doflamingo shooting his father. And it's actually very interesting that the murder weapon here was a stock standard gun, because if the culprit was one of the Vegapunks as suspected, then surely they would have a less primitive method of murder, like a laser beam or something. So this could indicate that the culprit is someone who isn't quite as technologically sophisticated. However, it also has to be someone with command clearance for the Seraphim and someone who knows enough about Egghead Island to operate its systems. So you're starting to see what I mean. The more we learn about this mystery, the less we actually know. I legitimately feel like I know less about what's going on right now than I did last chapter. And thinking about it logically, this chapter would have us believe that all 7 Vegapunks are innocent. Lilith and York are currently petrified, Edison is down, Pythagoras was blown to bits, Atlas is supposed to be with Chopper and Robin, Shaka was shot in the head, and Stella watched it all happen. This is such a beautiful mystery. Oda is hitting all of these beats perfectly, but I really do hope that it has a pretty banger conclusion, because poor solutions can often undo all of the good work put into mysteries. In fact, the better set up a mystery is, the harder it is to pull off a satisfying conclusion. And speaking of conclusions, people are jumping to all sorts of those, suggesting wacky stuff like Katarina Devon is impersonating the Vegapunks or the Elder Stars. Meanwhile, Van Alger is just warping all around the lab and stuff like that. But just stop and just take a deep breath if you're in that camp, because whoever this is has been traitorizing for at least 2 months. And we've seen both Katarina Devon and Van Alger very recently on Amazon Lily, Whole Cake Island, and even the fight against Law. And I hate that I have to ask this question, but it's mandatory in One Piece. Is Shaka really dead? Again, I hate that I can see a panel like this and still go, yeah, you know what, I'm not sure if I can believe that, but that's the curse of One Piece. Oda has refused to kill people so often that I now refuse to believe any death scene, even one as brutally visceral as this. And I don't think we should rule out the possibility of a very naughty Shaka just yet, particularly on Egghead Island where anything is possible through technology, cloning, conscience transference, and even generating tangible holograms. There could be any number number of ways to explain how we see Shaka murdered and that still not be the case. And given all the Daft Punk vibes, I wouldn't be surprised to see Shaka return harder, better, faster, and stronger, because more than ever, hour after hour, work is never over. And I guess the Cypherpol agents don't recognize Shaka, but they may not have seen who actually captured them. And if they did, they may have seen Shaka without the mask. Oh yeah, which is another thing. I refuse to believe that this is the end of this character because we still have yet to solve the mystery of what was behind the mask. And really, all I know right now is that Egghead Island is easily one of the most fun arcs for weekly speculation that One Piece has ever had. I absolutely love the ride that Oda is taking us on here, and I eagerly await more. The traitor has been revealed. Greed has manifested into its most terrifying incarnation since a certain Big Mom. Meanwhile, the largest naval fleet since the Paramount War is approaching Egghead Island, and in addition to that, I think we figured out how to beat the Seraphim. So let's get this out of the way. Who called York? I know some of you definitely did, if only because it was the most unexpected option. In fact, I think I said as much myself. However, what I will say is that York having done this would be the biggest twist possible, although it would require a pretty damn solid explanation from one Ichiro Oda. So good job there, Oda, for going for the biggest twist possible. And I have to say, I loved York's expression when she was towering over Stella in the chapter, because it's intimidating, but it's not like cartoonishly evil as a lot of villains turn out to be. And in fact, I don't think it's evil at all. Weirdly enough, I don't think that York holds any animosity or anger or anything towards her fellow Vegapunks. I think this is just pure greed. York is simply so greedy that she wants to be the only Vegapunk. And why would a greedy person want to share anything, much less share themselves? Which York currently does on a disturbingly intimate level. And I think her ambition to become a world noble makes a painful amount of sense. It's one of those, of course, how did I not think of that sooner kind of ideas? Because the world nobles really are the pinnacle of greed. When you take a human and strip away concepts such as empathy, logic, and everything with the exception of desire, what you end up with is the world nobles. Vegapunk has accidentally created a world noble. Someone so defined by desire that everything else becomes meaningless. Everything up to and very much including the lives of others. Which is why I don't think York takes any real pleasure in what she's doing. A character like Lilith might enjoy doing evil for the sake of evil, but with York, this is just unstoppable consumption. Stella mentions that York, and I assume the other satellites, have been to Marijois before, and if I had to guess, I would say that this is probably where the obsession started. York saw how the world nobles live and found it very compatible with her greedsome life goals. To be perfectly honest, if York did become an actual world noble, then she has the potential to be the very worst of them, because on a scientific level, York has been designed to embody greed. And even the existing world nobles do probably still carry some other aspects to their personalities. So York could be capable of some next level cruelty. The gun also makes a lot more thematic sense now. Thinking back on it, most of the impactful gunshots in One Piece have come from world nobles or government officials. Stuff like St. Charles shooting Heart-chan or Doflamingo shooting his father, both done with very basic pistols, and York is following in their footsteps. With that said, I was a bit shocked to see that the gun was scaled to York's size. So it's less of a gun and more of a big F-off cannon. And thinking about it, Shaka's shot to the head should have been much less clean and probably just taken his head right off. That right there is very classic One Piece though. It's always best not to think too hard about scales, because Oda consistently and radically changes the sizes of things for dramatic purposes. And if you think about it too much, then what you end up with is the Zoro Odin scenario, where you realize that there is absolutely no way that both of these characters could actually wield Enma. It's either going to be way too small for Odin or way too big for Zoro. And I swear, York just gets bigger every chapter. And it really does give me those terrifying Big Mom vibes. Because York could absolutely literally eat you or me or both of us if she wanted to. And why wouldn't she? She is the literal concept of greed plonked on a pair of legs. There's also this funny panel that looks like York is squatting over Shaka's body due to the necessary perspective that's happening. But I think it's quite appropriate, because that's what happens when you get a headshot in some sort of shooty game, right? You make fun of your opponent by teabagging their corpse. I'm very curious to go back on Egghead Island now, because York being the traitor makes a lot of sense in retrospect. For example, when she got petrified by S-Snake, York basically let that happen and then everyone else fell down. So S-Snake could have unpetrified York at that point and York just could have gone do and continued. But what I still don't quite grasp is how York lowered the Labosphere defenses, because she was in the worst possible position to make that happen. In the very center of the room in full blob mode and in full view of everyone. But maybe it's just one of those things. No one noticed what York was doing because no one actively pays attention to her. I mean, I don't actively pay attention to my toilet all the time either. I just assume it's there doing its job and not betraying me. I hope. All I can really say is that Oda positioned York perfectly, giving her a narrative alibi for each suspicious action committed, and I look forward to seeing more of her deadly greed from here on out. We have much bigger picture issues to be dealing with as well though, because this incident seems to escalate by an order of magnitude with each and every chapter, kind of like York's body size really. In a conversation between Sentomaru and Stussy, we discover that Vegapunk has discovered even more about the great mysteries of the world than Ohara did, which makes me think that surely he at least knows the name of the ancient kingdom. So even though we've kind of had our Void Century discussion already, I still think there is some big lore to be dumped here. Also, I can't be the only one to have noticed this guy, right? This Egghead Island civilian slash robot just looks like Frankie's head grafted onto a smaller body. But speaking of Frankie and heads and not bodies, there was a real tragic moment this chapter. The scene with Pythagoras and S-Snake, it was brutal as hell. Although it was very in keeping with the Boa Hancock character, and it reminded me of the time when she kicked both a puppy and a baby seal that had unfortunately somehow been left in her path. Same sort of thing here. S-Snake crushed the head of an adorable robot with no remorse, but with a surprisingly big explosion. With such a teeny tiny head thing, why did it make such a big bang? And unless he's being backed up somewhere, I have to assume for now that this was the potential death of Pythagoras, which isn't looking good for the the good aspects of Vegapunk. Shaka shot in the head, Pythagoras head blown off and then head blown up, and now even Edison is on the verge of elimination as well. And it's really not looking great for this group in particular. Right now, all we have left to save the day is roughly 1/3 of Frankie, because I don't think that anyone is on the way to save us. Robin's group is heading down to the fruit lab, and Jinbei's group is on the exact opposite end of the lab in a completely different building. I guess there's also S-Hawk, Kaku, and Zoro, but they're likely following one of the other two groups, the Jinbei or the Robin. So legitimately, the only hope remaining here may be a surprise Karubo appearance. That, or maybe Frankie can detach parts of his body to do something special, or just something. Finally, please, Cyborg Man, this is your time to shine. But what I'm more interested in is Lilith. She's currently petrified, and I imagine that the next logical step would be to smash her to pieces. I can't help but be a bit suddenly suspicious though, because Lilith is getting the York treatment. And if greed can manifest into what York has become, then what's stopping evil from doing the same thing? Or wrath in the case of Atlas. And in fact, we could still potentially be in a scenario where there is more than one aspect of Vegapunk working against us. The negative satellites rising up and destroying the good ones. Because right now, the good ones are the only satellites that have incurred significant damage and or death. But all of Egghead Island has admittedly made me very paranoid as a reader. And to be honest, even though we've outright seen York as the traitor, there is still that 1% of doubt within me that this is the truth. And it's because anything is possible on Egghead Island. Holograms, teleports, cloning, all of the things, so much. And even that one time where Atlas said that she could take on the face and body of anyone she wanted. That's suspicious. So more so than any other One Piece arc, it's really difficult to take things at face value. Speaking of Atlas though, I really enjoyed her section with Robin, if only for the fact that Robin was so confident in predicting what would happen as a result of Nami screaming. She knows the crew so well that it's obvious that Sanji will stop whatever he's doing to go and rescue Nami, which leaves Robin free to carry on her task, which as always is to get into the basement. Robin's role in so many arcs can be boiled down to find the thing in the basement, because Robin usually ends up underground like during Alabasta or Wano or in some kind of other hidden spot. So of course Robin is going to the secret lab. She is just innately attracted to the secret spaces. Cutting to Nami's group, and we have a very fun conflict with Sanji versus S-Shark, one that has taken on far greater meaning than I initially thought. Thinking about it, this fight is Vegapunk versus Judge. Vegapunk's ultimate form of humanity versus Judge's ultimate form of humanity. Although I love that Sanji is still crediting all of this to the power of love, completely in denial about his genetic enhancements. But this ties into the cover story, which is world-shakingly important, as we have just witnessed the founding of Neo Mads, complete with a clone parade, which I think is the first clone parade I've ever witnessed, albeit not one too appreciated by Ichiji or Reiju, which makes sense. Reiju doesn't really care, and Ichiji is emotionally incapable of caring. But it is kind of interesting in retrospect that Judge went down the path of suppressing all emotion, whilst Vegapunk went down the path of actively isolating all of his emotional aspects. This is big though, and probably a lot scarier than it looks with all of the happy faces, because these two are absolutely horrendous villains who have committed horrific acts, and now they're joining forces to create even more horrific acts. What comes of this is very unlikely to be positive, and it also probably doesn't end with just the two of them. Since the collapse of Kaido Incorporated, Queen was currently unemployed, so I could see him submitting an application for Neomads as well, and maybe even the OG Buckingham Stussy could make a return. Either way, this is a cross-guild scale development. It's going to be a big problem for someone, and that someone is probably us. And that's why we need problem solvers like, say, Rob Lucci, whose doctorate in assassination led him to immediately diagnose the cause of S-Hawk's absence. It was kind of scary how Rob Lucci went full psychology on this, the whole pick off the weak and then consolidate against the strong kind of thing, and also mentally damage the strong by killing the weak, but hey, this is why Rob Lucci is the professional. But my favorite moment of the entire chapter was the return of the Usopp gag, which was a trend with Kaku back on Water 7, as Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji all mistook him for Usopp, and even Nami was taken aback and had to perform some pretty intense mental calculations to arrive at the conclusion that Kaku was not in fact Usopp, even though Usopp was standing right next to her. In general, I love that this whole thing has come full circle. Lucci and Kaku began their time in One Piece as allies, I mean sort of friends, friendly, but then they became enemies, very unfriendly, and now they're actual allies and they're being friendly again. I also think we've discovered the secret behind the Seraphim flames. The working theory is that the flames only go out when the Seraphim use their devil fruit abilities, which has been observed in both S-Hawk and S-Snake. So we figured it out, but it's still very problematic. Basically, the Seraphim are most vulnerable when they're at their most powerful. Although I guess it probably makes fighting S-Hawk a bit easier, but for say S-Shark, it would be very hard to strike him whilst the fruit power is active. Something that took me off guard during the chapter was the montage of the last 3 months centering on Egghead Island, but everything makes so much more sense now. Previously, I did criticize the 5 Elder Stars for making this decision because it looks like a very arrogant and not well thought out course of action, but knowing that they knew that Vegapunk was conducting the forbidden naughty research makes this make a lot more sense. So much making. It's not so much that they were arrogant enough to think that they could live without Vegapunk, it's more that they have to live without him because he's doing bad stuff. And there was a really great panel I very nearly missed of CP5 arriving on Egghead Island, and if you look closely in the background, you can see Lilith threatening one of the agents with a weapon, and I love that Stella and Shaka don't seem fussed by this at all because it's just Lilith being Lilith. The crazy thing is that we still have a whole day left on Egghead Island, and so much can happen in a day. All of Dressrosa took place in the span of half a day, and the whole raid on Onigashima took place during one night. Right now, anything could happen, and all we know is that this event is going to shock the world. Something colossal is going to happen on this island, and we're going to be exploring all of the exciting and terrifying possibilities in the next video.